was to ask the experts to tell us a brief, to give us a brief introduction about their research and see if we could, we as philosophers could find bridges with the things that they work on. So the way this panel is going to work is that I'm going to present them one by one. They're going to give their presentations, and then in the end, after all of them have presented, we are going to open the round of Q&A. Okay? So let me start by introducing our first speaker, Sarah Bageler. She's a researcher at the Institute of Anthropological Research here at UNAM. She works mainly on the political dimension of food and nutrition practices, the forms of representation of food in colonialist context, and the shaping of national identity in Mexico and Latin America. She has published a number of papers on all these issues, and among them, there are some of them with splendid and inviting titles, such as Wheat versus Maize, Civilizing Dietary Strategies and Early Mexican Republicanism, I love that title, or The Cookbook in Mexico, a founding document of the modern nation. The title of Sarah's talk today is Recipes, Taste, and Citizenship in Mexico. I'll leave you with her.
Well, thank you very much, Paloma. I am very thankful to Paloma and Aaron for this invitation to share with you ours, I think, disciplinary views about food and art. In my case, as Paloma said, I'm a historian and anthropologist, so I'm going to try to think with you this issue, this subject about food and art from my discipline. And it was very interesting for me this morning to listen to the different splendid, excellent presentations that question if food is really an art. Well, I have a good news, is that Latin Americans, especially Mexicans in the 19th century, they had a clear answer. Yes, food is an art.
It's just that it's an art, it's a revolutionary art, and this art is thought in political, in a political dimension. And I would also like to talk today about how art and food is thought today among indigenous communities, which also they have a clear answer. Yes, food is art, but it's an art and it's a political strategy to gain social rights and political rights. Well, the bad news is that, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was such a specialized seminar. I thought that the public was going to be broader in terms of students, and so I prepared my talk in Spanish, but I have a PowerPoint in English. So I hope, well, the discussion can be, we can have a discussion afterwards. So, I'll start very briefly. Creo que tenemos algo en común, antropólogos e historiadores, con los filósofos que se interesan por la comida. Analizamos el gusto, tanto el buen gusto como el mal gusto. Reflexionamos sobre texturas, colores, sabores de un platillo. Nos preguntamos qué caracteriza una cocina auténtica de lo que no lo es. Nos preguntamos sobre las innovaciones tecnológicas, sobre las reconceptualizaciones que hacen los chefs contemporáneos. Pensamos las formas de preparar, pero también de presentar los platillos. Pero no estamos buscando lo mismo. Nuestro método no es el mismo, pero tampoco el propósito de nuestras preguntas. Si como historiadores y antropólogos buscamos comprender la forma, la presentación, la armonía de los platillos, tiene que ver mucho menos con la cuestión del placer desinteresado, que puedan formar parte de estas experiencias sensoriales de ingesta de alimentos, que con un tema central para nosotros, que son las relaciones de poder. Entonces, la pregunta sería, ¿por qué la comida se prepara, se presenta y se consume de cierta manera. ¿Cómo se construyen los juicios de valor sobre el gusto? ¿Qué significan esas nociones de autenticidad, de armonía que están relacionadas con la comida? Entonces, parto de la idea, del entendido, que estas construcciones de valor implícitas en las experiencias gustativas son resultado de dilemas, de contradicciones, de ambivalencias, de negociaciones que dan sentido a una estética culinaria. Entonces son esos dilemas y contradicciones y ambivalencias que quiero mostrar con dos casos paradigmáticos que podemos observar en América Latina, pero en particular en México. Y es esta relación entre arte y poder. ¿Cómo se origina? Por una parte, voy a dividir esta presentación en dos partes. La primera parte, entender esta relación entre arte y poder con un caso muy particular, que es el origen de lo que vamos a llamar arte de la cocina en México. ¿Cómo se origina esta formulación en México? Se origina en el siglo XIX y, como vamos a ver, surge en un contexto muy específico que tiene que ver con la construcción del primer republicanismo en México. Es decir, el arte de la cocina en México no surge solamente a partir de una reflexión sobre desinteresada o volcada hacia el placer y el gozo, sobre los sabores y las técnicas y la presentación, sino que debe de entenderse como un proyecto político de nación. Esta formulación de arte de la cocina en México hay que entenderla en este contexto. Y en la segunda parte de esta exposición quisiera mostrar cómo actualmente, el día de hoy, sigue estando esta noción de arte de la cocina en México ligada con un proyecto político de nación, en este caso de la nación multicultural. Es decir, el arte de la cocina es una estrategia política de gran parte de la población en México por integrarse a la nación multicultural. Y vamos a ver que no es gratuito, no es banal que se use la fórmula de arte de cocina y que se haga una reflexión sobre sus valores estéticos. Entonces, ¿cuándo comienza esta noción de arte de la cocina? La vemos por primera vez formulada en un recetario de cocina, en el Cocinero Mexicano o Arte de la Cocina Mexicana, publicado en 1828. Y el editor de este recetario, de este primer repertorio de cocina mexicana, postula que se trata de un verdadero arte, la cocina, y equiparable a otras bellas artes, dice el editor. Incluso se propone construir academias culinarias, estamos hablando de 1807, donde se formen a profesionales del arte culinario que van a tener la misma legitimidad que artistas del orden literario y pictórico. Ahora bien, ¿cómo se legitima esta idea de arte de cocina a principios del siglo XIX? ¿Por qué la cocina mexicana puede ser considerada un arte? En primer lugar, porque cuenta con la materia orgánica para crear formas y texturas, que no es cualquier materia orgánica cualquiera. Estos ingredientes de la cocina mexicana, en particular se habla del chile, del maíz, de los frijoles, son únicos, son nativos y son locales. Y es a partir de esta materia con la que se podrá crear al infinito platillos digeribles. El otro aspecto es que cuenta con toda una reflexión sobre los sabores. Se habla en este recetario, de esta primera, digamos, formulación de arte de cocina, del justo medio. Es decir, una cocina una cocina que cuenta con sabores que siempre están ubicados en un justo medio. En el caso, por ejemplo, del picante, no es ni demasiado picante ni insípida como las cocinas europeas, por ejemplo, menciona, ¿no?, el editor. No es desabrida, tampoco opaca otros sabores. Es decir, la cocina mexicana puede ser considerada como arte porque responde a esta noción de justo medio. y por otra parte es armoniosa, ¿no? Y qué mejor ejemplo que, por ejemplo, hablar del pulque, ¿no? Menciona el pulque, es coherente con el sistema culinario mexicano, lo que no es el vino. El pulque crea armonía con el resto de los platillos mexicanos, ¿no? Entonces, estas son, bueno, es uno de los aspectos que justifica el editor por qué la cocina puede ser considerada un arte. El caso de las técnicas es interesante, que propone apartarse, digamos, de la tradición latina del recetario, donde vemos esta convención, ¿no?, de entradas, plato fuerte, postres. Vamos a ver que el arte de la cocina mexicana va a proponer sus propias técnicas constitutivas de la cocina mexicana, ¿no? Una es lo cocido sin contacto con el fuego, solo con el vapor. Los que somos mexicanos podemos entender bien a qué alimentos se refieren, a los tamales y a la barbacoa, ¿no? Que no hablan solamente de técnicas de cocción, sino también de toda una textura y un aspecto visual de estos alimentos. Y por otra parte, el rubro de almuerzos dispuestos con masa de maíz, ¿no? Está considerado como toda una serie de preparaciones, de platillos que responden a un aspecto visual y que se comen de cierta manera, se consumen de cierta manera y que pueden ser aglomerados en una categoría como es esta. Otro aspecto que a mí en particular me parece muy interesante tiene que ver con las maneras de presentar, las maneras de mesa, que eso es un aspecto fundamental en las reflexiones y debates que se crean en el México de principios del siglo XIX y que tiene que ver con esto, cómo se va a consumir el alimento. Hay una clara oposición a la forma de presentación estética francesa, que estamos en el siglo XIX, tiene que ver con un acomodo, como lo pueden ver en la primera imagen, jerárquico de los platos y de los comensales. La gente se sienta según su posición social, o bien el otro modelo francés, que es el ambigu, que es lo que conoceríamos hoy día como buffet. Bueno, hay una gran crítica por parte de estos promotores del arte culinario en América, que dicen que eso resulta caótico a la vista, caótico para el estómago, caótico para la sociabilidad, no funciona. Por otra parte, también hay una crítica recordemos que los hispanoamericanos son grandes lectores de Rousseau, al modo que llaman, en su interpretación, relectura de Rousseau, al modo salvaje de comer, ¿no? Esta idea pues dispuesta en el Emilio de Rousseau, de que la mejor manera de comer sería lo más cerca de la naturaleza, ¿no? Y hay hasta escenas muy ilustrativas sobre un árbol, sobre el pasto. El caso del pensador mexicano de Fernández de Lizardi dice, no, eso tampoco es el arte mexicano de comer, no es salvaje. Y tampoco debe de ser una recreación de las comelitonas, como se conocía en la época colonial, a estos banquetes de indios. Se conocen como comelitonas o banquetes de indios, ¿no? Esta manera de disponer la comida por los indígenas en América. Y no solo por cuestiones estéticas, de presentación de platillos o de el sabor de las comidas, pero porque estas comelitonas lo que buscan es la cohesión social y política de las comunidades indígenas. Y lo que se está buscando, como mencionaba en un inicio, con este arte culinario mexicano, es más bien proponer una mesa republicana. Es decir, que siga los valores republicanos del siglo XIX. Se trata de promover una mesa homogénea, no solo en términos de los comensales, pero también del menú, donde puedan estrecharse los vínculos sociales, donde se puedan discutir cuestiones públicas, asuntos públicos. Esta es, digamos, la apuesta del arte culinario mexicano. Y por último, que me parece que es lo más importante, hay toda una reflexión sobre la digestión en la formulación y del arte culinario mexicano. La digestión vista no solo como un bienestar físico, sino como una estrategia civilizatoria. Una estrategia civilizatoria que comienza en las entrañas. Es decir, si los mexicanos se van a preocupar o los latinoamericanos se van a preocupar por cómo preparar un alimento, qué textura debe de tener, qué forma debe de tener, cómo se debe de consumir, es porque va a favorecer la digestión. Y esto va a hacer posible transformar los cuerpos, en particular de los indígenas, considerados pasivos, taciturnos, en ciudadanos útiles a la nación. Entonces, podemos ver aquí, ¿no?, esta relación clara entre arte, digestión y proyecto de nación, ¿no?, proyecto político. ¿Cómo voy? Creo que voy cerrando. Entonces, bueno, digamos, para seguir o corroborar, ¿no?, esta importancia de esta relación entre arte, digestión y proyecto político republicano, en particular con el principio de la libertad, podemos ver cómo es retomado, ¿no?, es toda la propuesta en particular de Rousseau, que Paloma estuvo mencionando, introduciéndonos al inicio, sobre cómo la libertad es finalmente un producto, digamos, digerible, ¿no? El mismo Simón Bolívar va a hacer una lectura de Rousseau y apostar por estas nuevas naciones latinoamericanas que se van a construir, entre otras cosas, ¿no?, con una transformación de los cuerpos políticos de sus habitantes. Entonces, bueno, sí, la cocina como arte es un proyecto político en el siglo XIX. Y hoy día seguimos pensando, es posible observar que el arte culinario es una estrategia política, en particular para las comunidades indígenas. En el caso... Ya, exacto, no, sí, ya terminó. Para las comunidades vulnerables, ¿no?, que a partir de la Constitución de la reforma constitucional en México, que crea la figura de ciudadano indígena como un ciudadano que tiene derechos particulares, ha sido muy importante mostrar esta indigenidad por parte de estas poblaciones. El problema es que muchas de estas poblaciones ya no cuentan con estos rasgos que el Estado mexicano ha reconocido como étnicos. No hay lengua, no hay vestido. Entonces, la cocina es una estrategia poderosa, importante para estas comunidades, para poder obtener derechos en tanto ciudadanos de esta nación pluricultural. Entonces, vamos a ver muchos proyectos colectivos haciendo recetarios, proponiendo su arte coca de la cocina, o su recetario étnico mixteco, donde lo que se trata es de celebrar el etos indígena, ¿no?, a partir de la presentación de sus alimentos, de los sabores, de las nuevas combinaciones de sabores que están haciendo, lo cual incluye muchas veces integrar productos industriales, ¿no?, dentro de su noción de gastronomía. Y de este modo poder, pues, negociar mejor con el Estado en tanto ciudadanos indígenas que tienen su propia expresión artística culinaria.
Thank you, Sara. Very interesting. I'm going to send you a translation of this because you really want to.
Yeah,
know what
I'll
she
send
said.
it.
No, I'll do the translation. So we have our second speaker, Miriam Beltran. So Miriam is a researcher professor at the Department of Health Attention at the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana de Xochimilco. Her research interests are on different sociocultural aspects of food and diet. She's the author of 2 books, Uncertainty and Daily Life and Modernity à la carte. Both of them are in Spanish. And if her face sounds familiar to some of you, that might be because she features in the Netflix series Taco Chronicles as an expert in tacos. So yes, she's also an expert in tacos. So we
have questions.
So the title of Miriam, but that's not the best. I mean, the best thing she's done is everything else but that. So the title of Miriam's talk today is Taste, Food and Cultures and Politics in Mexico. So I'll leave you here.
Gracias, Paloma. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much to be here, and thanks so much, Paloma, to invite us today. I'm so sorry. I'm going to speak in English. No, I'm not going to speak in English. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I don't know, I don't imagine myself here in Mexico speaking in English in National University. It's so awkward to me. And at the same time, I don't imagine myself waiting to be in UK or in United States or even in Malaysia or whatever you want to waiting for someone, no, to present in Spanish. So I think it's very important to me, and also it's a political act, if you want. Okay. Bueno, agradezco muchísimo esta oportunidad para aprender de este tema. Es un tema que hace ya mucho tiempo que yo vengo pensando, sin tener realmente la posibilidad de entrar cabalmente pues, a esto, porque bueno, pues yo ahora les cuento, llevo ya muchos años en esto y los temas y los compromisos y demás se me desbordan. Pero bueno, hace unos años la UAM, donde yo trabajo, me pidieron que hiciera un proyecto de programa universitario sobre alimentación y cultura, y entonces yo en ese momento decidí que había que poner una línea pues, de trabajo que fuera sobre el análisis de la gastronomía como expresión estética y utilizar, ¿no?, las mismas metodologías que se utilizan para el análisis del arte contemporáneo, etcétera, ¿no?, para la gastronomía. Hemos avanzado muy poco, realmente avanzamos solo con un proyecto de postdoc que tuvimos de María Paz Amaro, donde ella trabajó la gastronomización y patrimonialización de la comida oaxaqueña como elemento del turismo, por una parte, y por otra parte la creación de una marca de chocolate, casi como un performance, en la Casa Tropical de Héctor Galván. Entonces, esos son lo único pues, ¿no?, que tuvimos. Hay todo un reporte sobre eso, pero bueno, en general ese trabajo pues se enmarcó en la discusión que llevábamos todos en ese momento, todos los que participamos en lo que en su momento fue un grupo y que bueno, ahora ese grupo ha crecido no en términos numéricos, sino en términos de calidad, entonces está cada quien en sus instituciones y sus trabajos, pero en ese momento estábamos discutiendo justo todos esos procesos que ahora les adelantaré. En fin, yo llevo más o menos unos 25 o 30 años dedicándome al tema de la alimentación, primero como nutricionista, después hacia la antropología, tratando siempre de comprender el comportamiento alimentario. Mi pregunta central siempre ha sido ¿por qué la población come lo que come?, ¿no? En estos años, desde luego, he ido cambiando mis intereses, como les decía, he ido moviendo y adaptando mis metodologías, las referencias, las preguntas, pero también en todos estos años he visto crecer el interés por la comida, tanto en el ámbito académico como en la vida social. Donde hoy, ¿no?, parafraseando al cómico italiano Paolo Poli, creíamos que este sería el siglo del sexo y no, resultó ser el siglo de la comida. En términos académicos, he tenido que pasar de tratar de convencer a todo el mundo de que la alimentación es o era un tema relevante, tanto la parte cultural con los nutricionistas como la parte, digamos, de la construcción de un tema de estudio en sí mismo en los antropólogos y otras ciencias sociales, ¿sí? He tenido que gestionar de hacer eso a gestionar que hoy nos lleguen en los congresos de antropología, en la parte que tiene que ser el tema de alimentación, o en las revistas académicas, que nos lleguen cualquier cantidad de artículos y de presentaciones y etcétera, que hablan sobre aspectos culturales de la comida. ¿Por qué lo pongo así entre comillas? Porque bueno, también es verdad que hoy cualquiera que hace una entrevista a profundidad o rescata un recetario, que no es el caso, por supuesto, de aquí Sara, ¿no?, rescata un recetario, ya se nos pone enfrente como que está haciendo estudios culturales sobre la alimentación, ¿no? En fin, el tema es mucho más complicado. Lo que hemos visto también es que en la interacción, en la vida cotidiana, la comida no es solamente una actividad que se comparte continuamente y que es una actividad que forma parte de las actividades indispensables en la organización doméstica, sino que es un auténtico elemento de interacción social. Todo el tiempo se está compartiendo información sobre la comida y la comida está a cada paso. La comida en sí misma y las ideas sobre la comida. Lo podemos encontrar desde información sobre comida y sus atributos nutricionales a recomendaciones de experiencias gastronómicas, ¿no? La comida está igual en la comida de la calle, en los tacos, en la esquina de los tacos, que igual está en la oficina, en la comida godín, en la comida de... ¿Sí me explico? En la comida de la oficina, en las celebraciones de la oficina, que en un gimnasio, donde hoy hay miles de recomendaciones dietéticas. en un viaje, donde la comida es hoy parte de los atractivos, ¿sí? Y también es ya parte de las actividades de ocio y espectáculo. En el ámbito político, por otra parte, hemos pasado de la gestión de la desnutrición a la gestión del patrimonio gastronómico, no excluyentes, ni uno ni otro, sino todo al mismo tiempo. En México hoy hay políticas públicas para la desnutrición, para la obesidad, para el fomento de la gastronomía tradicional, para la producción y exportación de alimentos, para el desarrollo de producción orgánica, para poner a los grandes chefs como embajadores de las maravillas nacionales, para que atraigan turistas, en fin, todo eso al mismo tiempo y terriblemente con poco diálogo entre sí unas políticas con otras. Cuando yo estudié nutrición, en la televisión aparecían unos cintillos debajo que decían come carne, leche y huevos. Hoy aparece uno que dice o come frutas y verduras o ejercítate sanamente, ¿no? Hemos pasado, ¿sí?, de la discusión del riesgo de la grasa, la lipofobia, como la llamó Claude Fischler en los 90, que era la sociedad de la lipofobia, a que hoy estemos planteando la discusión del azúcar, si el azúcar es o no un veneno. El huevo, de que yo empecé a estudiar nutrición a hoy, ha entrado y salido varias veces de la lista de alimentos saludables. En fin, hemos pasado del que las mujeres nos digan mis niños no comen, a que las mujeres nos digan no queremos que los niños sean gordos o que mi niño sea gordo. En fin, todo esto. Hemos pasado en un restaurante a tener la oportunidad en otra época de ir a comer en abundancia, a ese shock que significó para la gente salir con hambre de un restaurante de nueva cocina. En México los grandes restaurantes habían sido aquellos que ponían en la mesa grandes cantidades de cocina francesa, española o italiana. Hoy los grandes restaurantes son aquellos que ponen pequeñas raciones de alimentos fundamentalmente de origen tradicional, whatever that means. En fin, vimos cómo llegaban, la comida se volvía más cosmopolita hacia el sushi, hacia las pizzas a domicilio. Los más grandes se acordarán de la llegada del Domino's, por supuesto la llegada del McDonald's. Yo de la llegada del McDonald's no me acuerdo, porque no vivía en la ciudad, pero sí me acuerdo de la llegada de Domino's, ¿sí? O eso que les decía, ¿no? Comer en un restaurante un estofado de boda ismeño, un taco de carnitas que ahora sería un taco de cerdo confitado, en fin, ¿no? Ese tipo de cosas. O comer un mole con carne en cocción sous vide, ¿no? O sea, ese tipo de cosas. Hoy por igual podemos comer un taco en la esquina de cualquier metro por 2 pesos o pagar 200 pesos por un taco con los mismos ingredientes y con la misma calidad nutricional. ¿Qué los diferencia? ¿Qué los diferencia? ¿Qué constituye la diferencia de precio? ¿No? En fin, en términos generales, que hemos pasado, para ir acercándome a esos temas, de discutir la ética de la agenda del hambre en el mundo, a discutir la estética de la comida, ¿no? Y todo esto apenas en 2 décadas o 3. Quizá, digo, 2 décadas o 3. Cabe preguntarse qué ha pasado, cómo hemos transitado de un lugar a otro. ¿Cómo hemos pasado, pues, de que todo este tema se instale en los foros académicos, en la vida cotidiana y, desde luego, en el mercado? Estamos frente a una sucesión de procesos que de manera simple podemos llamar poder, pero que en realidad entraña una compleja red de relaciones económicas y políticas que van marcando las pautas de lo bueno, lo malo, lo sano, lo malsano, lo que tiene valor, lo que no lo tiene, lo que es bueno de lo que no lo es, lo que es arte de lo que no lo es. Y bueno, y esta pregunta, ¿no? ¿Es arte la cocina, la gastronomía, la alta cocina? Es más, ¿qué diferencia la alta cocina de la otra cocina que no es alta? Y si es arte, ¿de qué tipo? Me van a perdonar que sea tan prosaica, pero bueno, yo como no soy del área, pues simplemente le llamé del arte del bueno o del decorativo, ¿no? Para que seamos más rápidos, digo, porque si me ponía ahí a averiguar seguro lo iba a hacer mal. Y al final de cuentas lo que quería decir era esto, ¿no? ¿Por qué Ferran Adrià un buen día fue invitado como artista a la muestra de arte contemporáneo Documenta 12 en Kassel? ¿Por qué provocó tanto revuelo esa invitación? Entre los críticos de arte, entre los artistas y desde luego entre los chefs y entre todos los que nos dedicamos a esto, ¿no? O sea, ¿qué había pasado? ¿Qué haríamos? ¿Lo pondríamos en un museo? ¿Seríamos capaces de generar y justificar que el Estado financiara una experiencia gastronómica con los hermanos Roca o con Enrique Olvera para que esa experiencia fuera universal y abierta a todos los públicos? De momento, y hasta que se demuestre lo contrario, la gastronomización de la comida es un proceso que ha estado mayoritariamente para agregar valor y ponerla en otro estamento del mercado, simple y sencillamente como los Komarov lo plantearon en su libro Etnicidad de Ser. En este proceso de gastronomización pasa también por la construcción del patrimonio con el visto bueno de las instituciones internacionales como la UNESCO, donde una vez adquirido el label de Patrimonio de la Humanidad se va directo a las guías turísticas, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, o sea, hay todo este proceso, ¿no?, que me parece que los Komarov lo describen muy bien en Etnicidad de Ser, que es la construcción de todo un patrimonio que genera un producto exótico con una relación en la tradición y una especie de nacionalismo que separa y muestra que es distintivo de un lugar para que valga la pena ir a visitarlo, ¿sí? Entonces, a final de cuentas, lo que está en todo esto, obviamente, es toda esta agregación de valor, ¿no? En el caso de México, una vez obtenido el reconocimiento, nadie sabía muy bien qué hacer con eso, porque tampoco quedaba muy claro para qué se había hecho todo este esfuerzo de gestión política del reconocimiento de la cocina mexicana como patrimonio inmaterial. No voy a entrar en más, pienso que es una cuestión de un rescate con un acicate nacionalista que a todo el mundo le pareció muy bien y que, bueno, había que analizar ahí ese nacionalismo por qué tiene tanto éxito político, ¿no? Finalmente, una vez se tuvo, y como nadie sabía muy bien a bien qué hacer, se decidió ponerlo para que lo gestionara la Secretaría de Turismo. Entonces, en la gestión pasada del gobierno, en el sexenio 2012-2018, el reconocimiento del patrimonio inmaterial de la UNESCO solamente aparecía en todo el Programa Nacional de Desarrollo en la Secretaría de Turismo, en ninguna otra parte, ¿no? Volvemos a lo mismo, se genera el gusto a través de unas relaciones de poder. Sidney Mint describió de manera magistral, a mi modo de ver, la relación entre el gusto y el poder. En su libro Sweetness and Power, un extraordinario trabajo histórico sobre la expansión del consumo de azúcar, expone cómo los factores sociales, económicos y políticos están relacionados con el consumo de un alimento aparentemente sin mayor importancia, ya que no estamos hablando de un cereal básico, lo que en inglés se llamaría un staple, ¿no? Sin embargo, el azúcar se vuelve importante en la dieta de los trabajadores ingleses a partir del siglo XVII, quienes empiezan a consumirlo con té caliente, cosa que es posible, por una parte, por la expansión colonial y, por otra, por el lugar que de por sí ya tenía en la alta sociedad inglesa el azúcar como un producto marcador de estratos sociales. En una especie de relación dialéctica, la producción de azúcar se expande por la demanda de un producto que a su vez se vuelve cada vez más popular y a su vez genera más demanda. El gusto, entonces, es resultado del poder y viceversa. El gusto es en sí mismo un generador de poder. Cualquiera que se dedique al estudio del comportamiento alimentario, casi sin importar desde qué disciplina o perspectiva metodológica, se va a encontrar que en las sociedades contemporáneas, excepto en aquellas donde hay una escasez extrema, el gusto es el primer factor por el que se decide la comida. Hoy más que nunca, ante la diversidad de opciones, la lucha por el mercado es la lucha por satisfacer el gusto. El mercado de los saborizantes es uno de los más poderosos dentro de la industria alimentaria. El Food Tech Summit, que se celebró la semana pasada en México, estuvo dominado, de hecho lo está desde hace años, por las empresas que producen aditivos y saborizantes. No se espanten, no son químicos, ¿eh? Son naturales, los que tengan valor nutricional, ¿sí? Que lo de hoy es el sabor natural con nutrición y que genere emociones. Ese ha sido uno de los principales temas del Food Tech Summit desde al menos hace 3 o 4 años. Emoción, sabor, nutrición, ¿sí? El año pasado, por ejemplo, estuvo dedicado a los sabores ancestrales, ¿no? Todo el mundo le puede, ¿no?, que le podemos agregar a lo que ustedes quieran y que tienen orígenes de todo el mundo y que tienen esta lógica rusoniana, que ha sido por algunos autores llamados neorusoniana, con la idea de que se vuelve otra vez a generar esta idea que lo ancestral, lo primitivo es lo bueno, ¿no? En fin, que todos estos sabores ancestrales se pueden agregar a bebidas, botanas, panes, lo que ustedes quieran. Hoy, por cierto, tenemos, digo, por poner un ejemplo, tostadas de maíz con nopal y chía, and so on, ¿no? Maíz, nopal, chía, linaza, lo que ustedes quieran. Y se exportan, no solamente se consumen en México, se exportan a la misma manera, ¿sí?, que tenemos hoy bebidas naturales en México a los que se les pone cúrcuma, una especie de la India, o se les pone semillas de albahaca, o en fin, todo un universo global local. En el mismo estudio de Mintz sobre el azúcar, él mismo mostró que los alimentos forman parte de un sistema alimentario como resultado de procesos globales que se interrelacionan con procesos locales, desde el principio mismo de la historia moderna. Aunque hoy en día, como dice Apadurai, esta modernidad ya se nos desbordó y asistimos a un ir y venir de interacciones globales y locales que se convierten de manera efímera en cada ocasión de consumo, constituyendo auténticos paisajes culturales sin referencia de tiempo ni lugar. Entonces podemos comer un jugo de cúrcuma, no sé qué, o con cúrcuma, con un mole tal, hecho con tal, en fin, ¿no? Las tensiones que provoca todo esto todavía no las hemos estudiado a cabalidad, aunque deberíamos. Son también producto de decisiones políticas sin analizar el impacto en la vida cotidiana de la gente. Hay miles de ejemplos del impacto en el sistema alimentario, del uso indiscriminado de determinados alimentos, la promoción del aguacate mexicano, la sobreexplotación de los agaves para cubrir la demanda de mezcal nacional e internacional, la contaminación del impacto de los ríos sobre el conocimiento gastronómico, en fin, hay muchísimos, ¿no? En todo este proceso, lo saben ustedes mejor que yo, juega un papel muy importante la construcción del conocimiento, que hace que esta interacción poder-decisiones políticas, a partir de las de las evidencias científicas de un grupo hegemónico, ¿no? En salud pública, desde su aparición y la medicalización de la vida cotidiana, las maneras de comer se han constituido en auténticos brazos armados del biopoder, tal como lo planteó Foucault. Este ir y venir de alimentos a la lista de los saludables, de las que hablé al principio, es resultado de esta construcción y aplicación del conocimiento. Pero aunque haya quienes crean que la evidencia es única e incuestionable, es obvio que no, que no hay una sola tendencia única, aunque sí hay solo una tendencia hegemónica, que es la que domina hoy las decisiones políticas sobre los alimentos sanos y los no sanos, etc. En fin, por cuestiones de tiempo, creo que cabe, le voy a reducir, pero sí quiero plantear dos cosas antes de que se me acabe el tiempo. Uno es, ¿cómo es posible que hoy estemos planteando los riesgos y la satanización del azúcar y al mismo tiempo estamos discutiendo la liberalización y legalización de la marihuana? Si bien es cierto que son dos cosas que tienen recorridos distintos, si ustedes revisan la historia de la prohibición del alcohol y todo lo que ha pasado alrededor del alcohol y del tabaco, vamos a encontrar ciertos paralelismos en todo esto. Lo que hay, pienso, en el centro de esto mismo es esta idea, que me parece que sí es un tema de la filosofía y que para nosotros es fundamental, que es hasta qué punto existe la voluntad individual y la libertad de elección, sobre quién sí se permite la libertad de elección y sobre quién no, sobre quién sí o sobre qué tipo de sustancias vamos a dejar la libertad de elección o quién no. El gran alegato para la prohibición o la limitación del azúcar o la construcción de esta estigmatización, de este estigma del azúcar, es que el azúcar nos cuesta mucho dinero en términos de salud pública. Me pregunto yo, ¿a qué vamos a esperar entonces para liberar? ¿No? Si es que algún día vamos a estar hablando de lo que nos cuesta, ¿no?, en términos de salud pública, la legalización de la marihuana. ¿O es que acaso pensamos que solamente está bien que se ejerza la libertad de decisión en aquellos sujetos que sí pueden pagar sus efectos en la salud y aquellos que no lo pueden pagar, no? Hay una parte en todo esto que me recuerda a las políticas de control natal. Unas políticas de control natal que, si bien es cierto había toda una parte de desarrollo, también es cierto que tenían en muchas discusiones, tenían un asunto, un tufillo, vamos a llamarle, un olor eugenista, ¿no? Entonces, Entonces, pues, lo siento, me voy a llevar un minuto más. Entonces creo que es un tema que es importante y que tiene que ver con esta cuestión de la libertad individual. El otro asunto que, lo siento mucho por el tiempo, que qué injusticia, que qué injusticia, que ustedes tuvieron hora y media para hablar, pero bueno. La otra cosa que me parece que es importante es esta discusión interespecies, ¿no? Y esta discusión de la construcción de los derechos de los animales, siguiendo la misma lógica de la construcción de los derechos humanos, pues solamente explíquenme cómo se va a resolver esto jurídicamente, ¿no? Cuando a final de cuentas estamos tratando que los animales entren a una lógica construida también desde la humanidad misma en sus tres aspectos estos de personalidad, sujeto, soberano, etcétera, ¿no? O sea, a mí filosóficamente, ¿no? Por favor explíquenmelo. Yo me acuerdo que fue un tema que discutí mucho en un seminario de antropología política en el doctorado a partir de la lectura del libro de Alain Soupiot, que si no lo conocen se los recomiendo ampliamente, Homo Juridicus, ¿no? Y que me parece que es un tema fundamental. La construcción de los derechos de los animales y también de qué animales, de los mamíferos superiores, de los reptiles, de los peces, de las moscas, de las cucarachas, de los insectos, porque en todo esto además hay ya toda una construcción industrial enorme de los alimentos plant-based, o sea, de todos los alimentos que construyen alimentos como si fueran de proteína animal, pero con proteína vegetal. Y hoy tenemos cosas tan locas y expresiones imposibles, como por ejemplo la carne meatless, o sea, carne que no es carne, sí, pero así se llama, ¿no? Meatless, muy bien, pues así. En fin, solo para que se den una idea del impulso de todo esto, la empresa Beyond Meat salió a bolsa este año y en 2 semanas duplicó su valor en bolsa. 2 semanas. En fin.
I am Juan, a chef from the project Sexto, and this is a project in which we want to express and to explore cooking as an artistic discipline. So, after looking at the program when Paloma shared with me, and also after listening to the discussions today, I wanted to change a little bit the topic of what I wanted to show you. And I thought that it would be better for me to show you an example of what I'm doing, and let's hope for discuss it and let's see what do you think about it. Today I will talk about this menu that we have been working for the last couple of months, and this has been very important for us in a way that we want to portray any aspect of nature through food. And in this such path, we have taken diversity as our main inspiration, and diversity thought as something from nature or cultural, and contingency as the tool for exploring diversity. Contingency also explained in a very biological way, that is just chance. This summer we met an expert in mushrooms called Nanae Watabe, who took us to the forest of Jalatlaco. Jalatlaco is a forest that is located like 25 miles away from here. It's like an hour drive from here. And there she showed us, this is located, I have a map. It's located like in the south part of the state of Mexico. It's close to. Okay. No. Okay. I can. Can you see the?
Oh, that's.
Okay. Well. Well, we are in the south of Mexico City, and I'm going to see here. We are here, and the forest.
There. It should work now.
Okay, perfect. But, no sé qué pasó. Sorry. Okay. Well, doesn't matter. Okay, yeah. We are around here. I'm shaking, but we are around here. Sorry, well, doesn't matter. And what really amazed us from this travel to the forest is the extreme diversity of mushrooms that we found there, and also by this mere feeling of discovery. So when you go out there to the forest and find your first mushroom, your brain changes, and then you start to find more and more and more, and different kinds of them. Some of them venomous, some of them edible and delicious, some of them edible but with no flavor, but super diverse. And we took this inspiration and we wanted to show people. We wanted to develop a menu where we could show the diners these two feelings: the feeling of discovery and also the diversity of mushrooms we found there in the forest. Actually, we also had a lecture here with this expert, Ana Watabe, and people came and could interact with the mushrooms and talk about their importance for the environment. The menu is per se the menu, the printed part of the menu were very important for us because it played an important role in showing also and portraying the diversity of the mushroom we were using. The first part was composed by the dishes we were presenting, and if you can see that they have some letters on the right side of the name of the dish, and those letters corresponded to the species that we were showing, we were cooking that day. It was very important for us that the diners could see the diversity of mushrooms that they were eating. So at any point of the dinner, they could go to the menu and see what kind of mushrooms they were eating. On the left part of there is the common name that the community where the mushrooms were collected was the name they were using, and on the right side the scientific name of the mushroom. We also put a reference of the places where the mushrooms were collected. Now I'm going to show you the pictures of the menu and what was the meaning of every dish on that dinner. The first part, all across the menu, every dish had like a purpose and a topic that we wanted to explore. And in the first one, it was diversity. So we created something that we called an edible abstract, and it is an edible abstract because you could see the whole dinner in one single dish. We put all raw or almost raw all of the mushrooms that they were going to eat during the whole dinner. And well, you can see there like chanterelle, the yellow one, or porcini, that they are like the most common mushrooms worldwide, wild mushrooms worldwide. But also the red one is actually two mushrooms in one. Russula, and that it's flavorless, but when it gets infected by hypomyces, it turns to be very, very flavorful. Also the white one, that it looks like a white rock, is not a common mushroom. It's actually a mold called koji that Japanese use for making sake. Also, we put the huitlacoche and two common mushrooms in the forest. Their common names are tejamanil and chilero. The second dish, the topic was the procedence of the mushroom. The procedence of the mushroom were the forest, so we wanted to portray the forest in a dish. We chose porcini, or pambazo, is the way the community called this mushroom. And we grilled it with pine. We put it pine shoots and also wood sorrel. The pine branches, we put them for a little while on the grill so they could release the aroma of the forest while you were eating the mushroom. The third is very simple. We just wanted to show like a shape the shape of the hymenum, where that is the organ that contains the spores. So on the base we put the jamanil puree, one of the mushrooms I already showed you. Then sauté trompa de puerco, the red one, that are two mushrooms in one, and then the mille foie on the top. We finish it in order to resemble the spores, some morel sand. In the community they call elotito, the morel. The topic for the fourth dish was the fungi as a kingdom. As I already told you, we used mold, and at that point on the dinner, the diners already had the experience with the micromycetes that are the fruitful mushrooms, the common mushrooms for us. Also microscopic mushrooms, well, fungi, that is yeast for the wine and for the beer. But at this point we wanted to show them the filamentous fungi, that is koji. We made risotto. We inoculated arboreal rice, that is the rice commonly used for risotto, with koji, and instead of pre-cooking the rice, we pre-digested the rice with koji and made risotto with it. We put it in a taco and we finished it with salsa with chile morita. And the last one is versatility of the mushrooms. The last one now is uncovered, but at the beginning, when the dish arrives to the table, is hid under the chocolate. So when you uncover the dessert, you will find a baby corn with sauteed huitlacoche. The huitlacoche is a common fungus used here in Mexico in quesadillas or in savory dishes instead of desserts, and we wanted to put it in a dessert. So we sauteed cacahuacintle, which is a corn that is also grows in this specific rainy season. And we put huitlacoche ice cream and also piloncillo. I don't know if you are related to piloncillo, but it's like raw sugar. Molasses. So, and more importantly, during the whole dinner, there is someone giving a discourse. So the people, the diners, can get the right message of what we want to say. Here is mushroom diversity. So the people, the person in charge of the table, is guiding the diners all through the dinner and telling them the importance of mushrooms and their diversity. So all of this, well, we wanted to portray as much as the properties we found relevant and beautiful on wild mushrooms, and through an aesthetic experience that went beyond only something that something that looked good or tasted good, but we took knowledge as a vehicle for emotion. Thank you.
Okay, now we have like about half an hour for Q&A, so please raise your hands if you have questions for the speakers. Gentleman over there, please raise your hands.
How do you know which mushroom is not toxic?
There are some clues, but you have to rely on the knowledge of the people of the village. So yeah, it's traditional knowledge. Yeah.
It's a very good example for enculturation.
Yeah.
Mushrooms, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very, very useful, and very, very useful to distinguish, no? If humans, we have knowledge, no? Inborn or in a process of learning. So it's a very clear, it's a very important, it's a very good example, mushrooms. The toxicity of mushrooms.
Meskin?
Sarah, didn't get the talk. I wanted to ask about I should have done better in high school. I had a terrible Spanish teacher. I'll tell you about her. But in English, and I take it in Spanish, art is ambiguous between the art notion, between the art is ambiguous between the painting sculpture notion and the motorcycle maintenance notion, the craft techno notion. So, like, if I do this with my students all the time, like, I'm like, if you go on Amazon and look up the art of, you get like the art of note-taking, the art of the hurry up offense, very important in Georgia, American football. The art of war, the art of, and I just right at the beginning where I was getting a little bit from you, it sounded a little bit like the techne craft notion of art that was in play there. No. So I just wanted you to tell me about it.
Not in the formal definition. They say clearly when they try to create these culinary academies, and when they publish this first cookbook, they say cooking should be legitimated as painter, sculptor. So they are clearly saying it should be a how do you describe main art? How do you call it? The big art? Bellas Artes, fine art. But it's true that when you see the description, why they say it should be, it is an art. Well, they talk about techniques, about the combination of flavors, the way of presenting food, the way of digesting food. All of this enters into their definition of why art. Food should be considered an art. Okay. And it's the same thing right now.
That was in the 19th century stuff.
But right now it's the same with the indigenous communities. They are saying their art, that they've been considered like people who make crafts, right? They don't do painting, they do crafts, artesanías, handicrafts. But concerning food, it's different. They have an artistic vision of food, and they are creating real gastronomies.
Okay, that's
so
great.
Food, they are trying to say that their food is different from the rest of their techniques, handcrafts.
Sí, pero en el siglo XIX no se imaginaba un arte que no fuera agradable, que no fuera bello, igual que la cocina. ¿O sí?
No, but that's why it's original to think about food, because yes, it has to be practical, beautiful, but also good for digestion. I think that for the 19th century, it's really important to think art linked with patriotic, nationalistic, political project, and the issue of digestion. That it should be not because of health problems, not because it has to be good for the body, but it can transform bodies into useful citizens. So the digestion is not thought as something good for health, as we can think right now in this medical discourse, but as a strategy to transform from the guts political participation. So art is a political strategy.
So you have a follow-up here and many other questions, so yes.
So just for follow-up, did they consider that all the food preparation were artistic, or they considered that some of the things that they were doing were not? So did they make a distinction, or they consider all the things that they were doing artistic?
In the 19th century, or right now you're talking
In the
about?
19th century, both. I mean, whether they make a discrimination between, among all the dishes they prepare, some of them are art and others not.
That's a good question. They do a discrimination. In the 19th century, it's clearly also an elite project, right? I mean, in the 19th century, indigenous food is clearly not an art. They're not eating in a good way. Their food is not delicious. It's not beautiful. It's not good for digestion. Humboldt said it, right? The big problem with Indians in America is that they are constantly indigested. That's Humboldt. And Buffon, Reinald, De Boer, right? All these naturalists.
But even
they
Mexicans,
the problem,
Mexican thinkers,
exactly,
Mexican philosophers in
the problem is
centuries
indigestion. Exactly. But that's for the 19th century. It has to be a good taste. The food that is art has to have this juste milieu, the middle point, right? Has to be harmonious and has to respond to an elite project of nation. Right now, there's also discrimination because the indigenous communities, they are representing their culinary art in a way that has to coincide with this indigenous ethos. It has to be ancestral, pure, good for nature, right?
Organic, etc.
Yeah, well, they don't talk about the ethos, yeah, but good, respectful with nature, pure, right? So there's also a discrimination. But what is really the paradox is that they are including industrial food. Cans, bottles of sauces. So I think there's an original concept of art, of gastronomy among community indigenous.
Axel.
Indigenous communities.
I mean, something that seems to be in common, no sé ni qué lenguaje hablo. No hablar español. Porque especialmente ahora con estas últimas respuestas es como claro que hay un eje temático muy importante acerca del papel del conocimiento y qué tipos de conocimientos dan sentido a la comida. Entonces, como yo voy a hablar de eso mañana, pues no quiero decir demasiado, pero sí quiero concentrarme precisamente en la última diapositiva de tu plática, ¿no? Porque estaba muy descontextualizada, ¿no? Entonces no me quedó claro exactamente de cuál es el conocimiento que es relevante para ti. Tú esperas un conocimiento de la persona que vaya, o más bien que parte del resultado de experimentar tu comida es que obtengan un nuevo tipo de conocimiento. ¿Y qué tipo de conocimiento es?
Sí, que tengan un tipo de conocimiento al final. Por eso también la estructura del menú puedes tener referencias a los nombres, tanto el nombre común como el nombre científico, y a lo largo de, como una referencia que puedes tener. Y además la idea es que puedan también aprender sobre que por ejemplo, el reino fungi es no solamente los hongos que conocemos, sino también hay microscópicos, también están los filamentosos, los mohos, y que además los usamos también para comer. Entonces, el resultado final es que toda esta información también sea enriquecedora, y esa sensación de enriquecimiento también contribuye a la emocionalidad que se busca.
¿Eso se lo tienen para un texto? ¿Viene cuando
se va platicando? Tienes el menú y se va platicando a lo largo de toda la cena. Entonces,
Y tienes una charla hoy, que lo sabes de antemano.
Ok, muchas gracias.
Eileen?
Okay, thank you. And I too couldn't interpret everything, but I really liked this idea of the idea that freedom is difficult for us to digest. So I don't know, it just struck me as I guess it's sort of a metaphor that we really need right now, that we think, well, I'm from the United States, I think we think, oh, freedom, it's like at our fingertips. So I really like the idea that no, it's like you have to break it down, and it's going to give you trouble. It's not, it's in a way you're not just naturally flowing with it. No, it's something you're going to have to digest, which is not a process that we fully control. Anyway, I love the metaphor. I don't know exactly how to follow it out, but I think it's fascinating. It's just such a different way of thinking about freedom. And if I understood that.
Yeah, I love that metaphor too, and I love the interpretation Hispanic Americans make of it in the 19th century, because they take it to the literal sense too. They really promote. Simón Bolívar was a great promoter of frugal diet. He called it foods tough to digest. So they really promote in the newspaper, in folletos, I don't know, brochures, right? That the new Hispano-Americans are not, right now, they're not colonial subjects, right? They will be independent Republicans. They have to start eating tough
to digest aliments. So they make a really literal interpretation. Yeah, but I love it too. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So this is the first time I've come across this idea of food as an instrument of decolonization. And, coming from a decolonized thinker. So the question I had is, so you talked about the Republican table versus French service. And I understand something about the formality of eating and so on and so forth, but there's also a question about actual cuisine, the recipes, the cookbooks, and a new way of making food and so on. And I'm just struggling to come to grips with what that would be. How could it be an instrument of decolonization, and why would anybody have thought of this of all things?
Food, you mean?
Food, yeah. Well, I mean, when I think back, I mean, so Gandhi talked about spinning and having homespun cloth. So maybe that's kind of an analog in India of what you're talking about.
I think it comes from a debate from the 18th century. So these people from the 19th century, and even today, indigenous communities, they know there's a long history behind that starts at the 18th century with all these debates saying that in America, which is an American debate, right? That in America, nature is degenerative. The substance of food is not enough. The Buffon, that's the theories, the European theories that say food in America is not good enough. So that's one of the...
What they find in America?
Because the water is not good enough, the climate is not good enough, the soil is not good enough, so food is not good enough. And Buffon has, 32 books to demonstrate this. How animals are shorter, men are feminine, women don't have enough menstruations, right? So they are degenerative.
Was undernutrition behind that? Undernutrition was behind that. Because all the time they say that the indigenous people in Mexico, they don't have enough biological possibilities to work. So that's why they say that the food is not good enough here. And they talk about that, the biological capabilities to work. We have to remind that
it's not an industrial society, is that?
No, because they are undernourished. They don't have really they don't have enough activity to
they talk about substance.
No, pero no tenían suficiente fuerza.
Yeah, they are degenerated.
Yes.
So that's one of the main ideas that sustained coloniality, the colonial regime. People in America are not good enough because they don't eat enough good food. So imagine, the debate in America in the 18th, 19th century is about food. Food is really central to think about the colonial regime and the decolonial movements in America. And I think that's different from Asia, right? In America, really food is one of the issues to legitimate the superiority of European empire, colonization. The thing that Americans are degenerated. So Americans will be trying to show that that's not the case, right? So that's why they publish very soon their cookbooks, sooner than Italy, than Germany, than the first cookbooks in Hispanic America are very. They appear very, very soon because they are trying to respond to these European naturalist theories of the scarcity and bad quality of food in America.
But I want to say that in Africa past more or less the same, because Audrey Richards, who was the first anthropologist who worked with anthropological methodology, work about food and hunger, she found and she discussed that the problem with the native were not that they don't want to work. She said that they don't have enough food to work because they don't have enough energy to do this kind of tough work, to is work in una mina. ¿Cómo se dice una mina? Mine. Huh? In a mine, you know. And it was more or less the same. We have to remember that the first cultural idea about food is share, of course, but the food has the utility to get enough energy to work. The society, saciedad, do you understand? Society is well said. Society, saciedad, I don't know. Satiety? No, satiety, no? Isn't it? Okay. Sorry. The satiety, but also the energy for work. And what was, behind all of this idea, the reality was the undernutrition. No, the people are undernourished here in Mexico. And was one of the main issues to put how to start a new nation. And one of the main problems was to have enough food, a good feeding practices for the people, for the indigenous and all Mexican people, have enough energy to work, to build a new country,
So we have five people on the list, and I see more hands now, and we have less than 50 minutes, so please keep your questions short. Yes.
Okay, so my question is for Anna, and I want to ask you, what is your process to create a menu? I mean, how do you translate an experience like foraging mushrooms into a menu? How do you know it is done? Like, how do you know you achieved what you wanted? How many courses, or what is your process?
Okay. First of all, we take the strongest, the things that inspire us the most are the things that we take. Like, for example, here in this menu is diversity and the sense of discovery. So we took this both and tried to portray it all along the menu. So that's why we took like as much as mushrooms we could, but also cooking them properly, and we had like a lot of talks with the people that had already experienced cooking the mushrooms. So we talked with the communities and with the people who had actually the experience with them. And also we have this kind of resources like the menu, where you can see the names of all the list, like it's simple as you can see the long list of mushrooms, their names and the scientific names, and these references are important. So first, it's to use simple resources like diversity, and also to have a strong discourse all along the menu with someone guiding the diners and trying to give them the right message.
But how do you know they get the right message? I mean, how do you create that discourse if you are talking about a menu? Because in other science, you know how to create like an essay, but how do you create a menu? How do you know it's like correct? Like it is telling the people what you want to tell them.
Yeah, we have been working for the last year trying to build this infrastructure, like logical infrastructure, so we could deliver this. So actually we have been trying this for like 4 or 5 menus and having feedback from the people. Actually, yeah. So far has been really feedback.
Okay.
Patrick?
Basically, I had the same question as Aaron, but I had a slightly different take, so maybe it's worth thinking. So in French, there is the notion of art, which it's not only the technique, it's also a highly codified practice. Mm-hmm. And well, good examples of highly codified practice are arts, of course. So it's not straight that by appealing to painting and sculpture, you thereby appealing to an aesthetic dimension rather than a highly codified practice with normativity that kicks in. where you have possibilities to, get it wrong, get it right, and separate groups between those that get it right and those that get it wrong. So I think, I would rather say that it's, despite what they say, they're really trying to, put together a highly codified practice that gives a sense of identity, but there is no real aesthetic dimension to it.
I think there is in the way of presenting food. Well, I show it. I'm sorry, it wasn't it, but in the way of presenting food in the table, that it has to follow the local code. That is not the French code. It's not the indigenous code. It's a new code. I don't know if it's what you are talking about. That's what. The combination of flavors, combining the Spaniard tradition with indigenous tradition and creating something new. I don't know if that enters into the aesthetic dimension.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe
maybe
I'm not very familiar
with
with it.
saying no aesthetic dimension, but it seems that it's rather the codified element of the practice.
Yeah.
That's actually much stronger than the flavor element.
That's
But
true.
yeah.
I agree.
That's what
I
it is.
agree.
So in the Renaissance, for example, there were very strict codes on how to depict Madonnas, for example. In the same way, maybe that would be parallel to this case. So the fact that there is a code doesn't preclude that there's also like I'm just
other practices.
In French we would say the art of politeness. There, it's not about the technique. It's really about having some kind of normative way to deal with other people and separate those who respect the code and those that don't.
I think that's
And I think
central in this case. Yeah,
exactly.
it's a repertoire, it's a canon. They're creating a canon, a code. Yeah, I agree.
Bueno, a pesar de que los tres hablaron de algo bastante similar, la alimentación, la comida, la gastronomía, la cocina, hubo varios términos que creo que quedaron volando un poco en esta habitación, como ciudadanía, poder, política, arte. Lo que yo me pregunto, y va un poco para los tres, es en tanto el arte ha tenido un papel de poderío, de ejercicio del poder, históricamente hablando, y que Sara hace unos momentos habló de que la cocina también, construida como arte, también se ha visto atravesada por este poder, como el alimento, siendo algo en lo que es tan fácil de mostrar poderío, de tener políticas, de tener una dimensión totalmente social en este caso, que puede tender hacia lo estético, pero sobre todo a lo político, ¿cómo puede convivir con el arte como poder? En términos más sencillos, ¿necesita la cocina ser reivindicada como arte para ser un objeto de estudio válido de las humanidades y de las ciencias sociales?
Yo creo que no, pero, porque hasta antes de que se discutiera esto ya lo era, ¿no? Y de hecho ha ido y venido y ha tenido diferentes momentos y demás. No, yo te puedo hablar de cualquier cantidad de antropólogos y sociólogos donde la discusión estética les queda lejos. La construcción social del gusto, no. Eso es otra cosa y, pues digo, Bourdieu mismo es un ejemplo de eso, ¿no? Pero no, yo creo que no. Yo más bien creo, y perdón que vuelva otra vez a ser tan prosaica, pero yo más bien creo que es resultado de una serie de ejercicios que tienen que ver con, por una parte, una forma de construir conocimiento y por otra parte, una forma de construir objetos de valor.
Pero...
Porque hasta hoy, la alta cocina solamente está, ni siquiera en los museos públicos, ¿no? O sea, solamente está restringida a un sector de la población. Entonces, lo único que ha hecho, al menos hasta hoy, ha sido agregarle valor. O sea, precio. Vamos.
Yo creo que la academización de la cocina como una actividad ya llamada artística, una disciplina artística, podría darle igual con mucha estructura a la voz de personas que están justamente en la alta cocina o que están cocinando, y que no tienen quizás no el interés, pero no tienen el acceso a recursos intelectuales para poder dar poder formar una opinión fuerte dentro de estas discusiones. Tengo muchos compañeros cocineros en la cocina, yo lo he visto, que en realidad son personas muy inteligentes, pero tienen la idea de que no pueden ser partícipes de estas discusiones porque simplemente no están entrenados para hacerlo. Entonces,
lo que no tienen es metodología, que,
no
es, justo lo que te preguntaba ella, ¿no?
Sí. No hay una metodología. Entonces, la academización de esto como una práctica artística podría darnos también una estructura intelectual que nos ayudara pues, a expresar mejor lo que queremos decir.
Ahora, está en el punto mismo de la discusión hoy, por ejemplo, en cosas como en CONACYT. O sea, cosas así de importante y de relevante es el tema, porque ¿qué artes sí entran, bueno, a CONACYT y al Sistema Nacional de Investigadores y al Sistema Nacional de Creadores? ¿Qué artes y qué saberes van a entrar al sistema o no? Obviamente yo voy a seguir reivindicando. O sea, por mí... No, o sea, si por mí encantaba que todos los saberes entren. O sea, por mí encantaba. Pero claro, pero yo lo que digo es, puta madre, hemos llegado hasta aquí. Para que ahora nos digan que vamos de regreso. Yo vengo de una familia donde mis padres no fueron a la universidad. Entonces comprenderán que volver al conocimiento tradicional, después del esfuerzo que hemos hecho todos, pues no me encanta la idea. Pues no.
So my parents didn't go to high school either, and I'm here. One question to Juan. You mentioned that you're interested in creating art, making cooking art in your presentation. So, what do you think that you are doing? So, what is the thing? No. It's not aggressive at all. It's like, so first assumption: not every cooking is you consider it to be artistic. So there is a distinction between dishes which are art and dishes which are not. Those that you're doing, or at least some, or it's an attempt to do art. So what do you think that distinguishes one from the other? It's related to my question, so how the people were seeing that, and I was asking what do you think that distinguishes art dishes from non-art dishes, so I'm asking you. Okay. So what do you take to be doing? Not aggressive at all. So.
It's the mindset is very simple, it's just the motivation that I want to, everything we want to express through an aesthetic experience, any aspect of the world through food, but there is a motivation behind our motivation is to express it as an artistic experience. So we work in that way. So I might be cooking something, or anyone might be cooking something that gives you like an emotion or an aesthetic experience, like looking at the sunshine. But I think if there is not this motivation to communicate something about the world through an artistic object, so I think that's it.
So we have 2 questions and we're running out of time, so I ask you to please keep it short. Yes. No, you. Sorry, I don't know your name. I'm sorry.
Bueno, respondiste un poquito a mi pregunta, pero era esa cuestión de que cuando los europeos venían, cuando los españoles vinieron, y tenían esa idea de la dieta indígena y como que era peor de su dieta y que la gente era como no tan fuerte y estaba muriendo y todo eso, ¿no? Pero luego, como yo no lo he leído el libro de la cocina de México, la primera, pero digo, ¿cómo justificaron ellos? Porque tú dices que está muy basado en los alimentos prehispánicos mexicanos, ¿no? Como el maíz, el chile, el frijol, cosas que eran aquí antes, mucho más antes de los españoles y su llegada. Entonces, ¿cómo justificaron ellos en escribir un libro, o cómo era como el intercambio entre esa idea de nacionalismo, ¿no? Que vamos a crear una nueva nación, pero también tenían una crítica muy fuerte, como suena de lo que dijiste, una crítica muy fuerte de la manera que estaban comiendo los indígenas, de su dieta, etcétera, igual de los europeos, como la misma crítica. Entonces, tú dijiste un poquito como que era la fusión, ¿no? Pero quiero saber un poquito más de esa parte, del intercambio entre
Sí.
esas dos cosas.
Bueno, ese es un punto que quizá, bueno, yo no lo había pensado así, pero es la defensa. They are defending the ingredients, not the way of how Indians cook. They are defending the chile, the maíz, the beans, as responding to the naturalist theories.
But not like ancestral recipes.
No, that's a very modern patrimonialistic discourse, saying we eat as Aztecs eat, our roots. That's not a 19th century discourse. No, they are responding to naturalist theory that maize, corn is less. Is not as good as wheat, for example, right? Or that beans are not as good as olives. They are responding in that way in the cookbook, saying, no, our ingredients, and they can produce good flavors, and they are good. They're not protecting indigenous ways of cooking.
All the preparations that you were talking about how they're making tamales and tortillas and all those things, that's not, on some level, like, promoting that, like, pre-Hispanic, no? Like techniques of cooking and cooking al vapor and...
No, they are promoting the present. We are good Americans, we have good bodies because we are eating that and that's good for digestion. But there's no this discourse of Aztecs where or Indians are the proof of great civilizations. That comes
so
afterwards.
many of those things came from before. I mean,
But the discourse, I'm talking about the representation, right, of the Mexican. Not what people continued eating tortillas and tamales and right, but in this canon, in this codification of Mexican culinary art, they are making something new. They are not recuperating the indigenous. Well, they are saying they are mixing it with new techniques. They are borrowing from Europe what they think it's convenient. I mean, it's a new discourse. I don't know.
I think you have to go to see it as Hobsbawm put it on. You know, it's the invasion of tradition necessary for the construction of the state nation. You know? Entonces, en México, I wrote that in a book que se llama Cambio Alimentario Indígena, algo así se llama. Hace ya más de 10 años que se publicó aquí en la UNAM. La construcción del nacionalismo y del uso de ciertos elementos prehispánicos en la construcción del Estado-Nación es ambiguo todo el tiempo en el siglo XIX, todo el tiempo. Y se usan determinadas cosas. Ciertamente Sara lo ha estudiado mucho más específicamente, pero como proceso general responde perfectamente a lo que Hobsbawm dice. Se requieren ciertos elementos tradicionales y construidos como tal. O sea, están construyendo qué es México. Y eso está a discusión en ese momento. Y la alimentación tiene un papel importante. Como tema, como preocupación social, pero también como tema para la construcción de una nacionalidad diferente, que es absolutamente necesaria para la construcción del Estado-Nación, que es qué delimita lo que está dentro de este espacio, qué rasgos. Y entonces, bueno, pues ellos van construyendo, ¿no? Ese diálogo tú lo puedes ver en muchas cosas, en la construcción misma del Museo de Antropología y cómo se trata de interpretar todo el tiempo la mexicanidad. Eso es una cosa que yo creo que todavía no hemos terminado.
Okay, I think we run out of time, so please join me in thanking this great panel of speakers.
Okay, so welcome back for the last session of the day. So the paper is Food Fraud or Taste and Authenticity by Sarah Worth from Furman University. Sarah now is going to give the talk, and then Gustavo Ortiz, our very own Gustavo, will give the reply. Okay, you have 45 minutes.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to the organizers. Eileen actually told me about this conference in March, and I have been looking forward to it ever since. So I'm so excited to have all of these interests come together in one place. It's very satisfying for me. My paper, to give a little bit of context, I take college students to Italy each year for about a month on a study away course to study slow food, which is ideologically the opposite of fast food, in case you're not familiar with that. And it's a movement that has come out of Italy, and they really have perfected it. But we talk a lot about authenticity and what real food is and good food. And because we're doing what we're doing, we also end up talking about olive oil quite a bit. And so my paper is about olive oil. So I hope that you enjoy, and I hope that I can keep your attention through this last session. It's just very late in the day. So philosophers, especially philosophers of art, have had a long interest in fraud. Fraudulent paintings have captured the imaginations of readers and museum patrons, wondering just how we can tell the difference between a real one and a fake one. Fraudulent paintings mistake origin, they mistake accomplishment, but good ones can fool many or even most people. Art connoisseurs are trained experts to understand formal elements, style, technique, and material to help them determine the difference between the real and the fake. So what is at stake can be millions of dollars, but also a sense that originals convey something much more special than a fake, and they provide us with the connections to their makers, they provide originality, and the all-elusive authenticity. Some might even say that those originals have an aura about them. With some examples, only trained experts can tell the difference between the authentic and the fake, but there might be other ways of showing or knowing. So is there such a thing as fraudulent food? How can we tell the difference between authentic food and fake food? Is there such a thing as fake food? In this paper, I'm not talking about authentic cuisine per se, but rather authentic ingredients like extra virgin olive oil, wine from a particular region or winery, or whether or not certain flavors contain real ingredients or have only been chemically enhanced, like most anything that is truffle flavored. With food, knowledge comes primarily from tasting, but also from various beliefs that we have about where it came from or what it is supposed to be. Reading labels provides a foundation for those beliefs, but labels can be misleading, they can exaggerate, and they can even lie. Labels may not be a good source of reliable knowledge about food at all, since they also reduce nutritional information into relatively meaningless percentages and quantities measured in scientific terms, not ones that make sense for most eaters. In the case of food, taste can supply us with a form of knowledge that cannot come from any other sense. So in what follows, I want to argue that our sense of taste is an important vehicle for knowledge that we have radically underdeveloped because of the way that we have privileged vision and hearing over taste and smell in terms of the way that we construct knowledge. And so first I'll explain why taste has been so undervalued as a form of knowledge in comparison with vision and hearing. And then I'll outline some of the important historical aspects of extra virgin olive oil, since it works very well as a case study in this case, and in terms of taste, authenticity, and large-scale fraud. And lastly, I will develop the argument that with a better understanding of the way the sense of taste functions, I can offer a more robust account of taste as a form of knowledge. So there's a strong tie, both historically and linguistically, between vision and knowledge. As far back as our ancient Greek roots, oida, the verb to see, is eidos, to know, in its past tense. So after one sees, one knows. Eidos is, of course, the word Plato uses that we translate as form or idea. Heraclitus was the first to call vision the best of the senses when he said that the eyes are more exact witnesses than the ears. Plato uses the visual analogy of light in the allegory of the cave as being the manifestation of understanding, and without the ability to leave the cave and quote-unquote see the light, one cannot know. Ideas allow things to appear clearly, just as light helps to illuminate objects. Plato thought the eye is useful to help us with our recognition and recollection of objects in the outside world. For him, sight is the lens between the outer world and the inner mind, and the only sense that can allow us to have objective knowledge about the outside world. Aristotle proclaims in the Metaphysics that all men desire to know, and then remarks specifically on how we delight in vision more than the other senses, and we delight in it for its own sake, in addition to its usefulness. So our primary vehicle for knowledge is vision. Descartes, one of the founders of the science of optics, took the eye to be a completely passive lens, but one that separated the physical and the metaphysical, the corporeal world and the mind. Sight is bound to light and space. The clearest manifestation of the corporeal world, while hearing is tied to sound and time. Sight gives us objective knowledge, and much of what we call reliable epistemology is dependent upon sight rather than our other senses. Currently, I believe that we still value vision as our primary vehicle for knowing something to be the case. Eyewitness testimony and seeing is believing are phrases that indicate the dominance of vision over stable and reliable knowledge. A good philosophical theory is called a view, as it is the way that I see things. I see means I understand, and when I see the light, I have gained insight or captured truth. Hearing comes in at a close second in terms of the senses that produce reliable or objective knowledge, since it is also information gained at a distance. Since vision and hearing both work with a separation from our physical bodies, we're able to have relevantly similar experiences to other people in close proximity. Vision and hearing are referred to as the distal senses, ones that we use from a distance. But taste is dramatically different. We don't know things from tasting, but rather taste is something that gives us only preferences or likings, or perhaps sense experiences that cannot be reflected upon. But sight can give us knowledge, the kind of knowledge that philosophers have preferenced since the beginning, objective knowledge, or what I might here call visual objective knowledge. It might go too far to say that vision dictated much of philosophical epistemology, but I don't think that it is an overstep to say that vision and epistemology are absolutely codependent. So much of aesthetics, despite the fact that we focus on the experiences of the senses, is both dependent upon a cognitivist approach as well as one that absolutely favors the visual. That is, aesthetic appreciation requires some sort of cognitive content or belief in order to make sense of the aesthetic pleasure that we experience. Approaching it in this way, our capacity for taste provides sensations, but not cognitive content, feeling, but not thought, or so the objections go. But the objections might not be so strong if we didn't value sight so highly above the other senses. Maybe other senses can give us different kinds of knowledge other than the vision-centered theories can. So taste, touch, and smell are referred to as our proximal senses, since we use our bodies directly to experience the world with these, although it actually makes no sense with smell, but that's what it gives. Hegel, for instance, claimed that our lower senses were even incapable of providing artistic experiences since they were practical and not theoretical, and thus incapable of providing information to the imagination. These lower senses cannot give us anything other than bodily sensation that produces nothing for us to think about in terms of content or contemplate in terms of the imagination. Kant says that matters of gustatory taste or flavor can be agreeable but not beautiful. They can be agreeable to me but not beautiful to everyone, since matters of gustatory taste are mere sensations. Mere flavors and aromas, he says, along with mere color and mere tone, are relegated to judgments of agreeableness because they have as their ground merely the matter of sensations, namely mere sensation, merely. That is, he's a formalist when it comes to matters of beauty. And he thinks that the form contributes to the representation of an object, but not the matter, or the pure aesthetic sensations. Thus, sensations are necessary to be able to have aesthetic judgments, but the possibility of contemplation about them is what makes it possible to universalize them and to make them command universal assent. Thus, we can't derive knowledge from our lower senses or any mere sensations, and we can't make aesthetic claims about those sensations. So the notion of taste and aesthetics is used more widely in its metaphorical sense, in the sense of liking or finding pleasure in certain kinds of objects than materially tasting. Our senses of taste and smell can warn us of rotten food or poisonous food, but they can also help us to experience the world around us, especially in very culturally specific surroundings. And for this reason, I think taste and smell are essential vehicles for meaning making. We aren't just passive receptacles for food. but taste can inform us about our world in very precise and even unique ways. Hopefully we can take pleasure in what we taste. When we taste or ingest, we are passing the outside world into our bodies. We take in the world. We take the external and we make it internal, or we make the objective the subjective, passing it right over our tongues. And when we eat, we learn what something tastes like. We gain knowledge that we could not gain from even the most detailed description. Now, not all tasting is aesthetic, but I do think that tasting can be appreciated aesthetically in ways that we haven't allowed it to, given our dominant historical framework. Taste can give us pleasure, both bodily as well as contemplative, and taste can also give us knowledge. All right, so in order to demonstrate why I think it's important to develop a philosophical account of taste, I want to talk about olive oil, real extra virgin olive oil. So the health benefits of extra virgin olive oil are tremendous, and they're one of the primary reasons that people who eat a Mediterranean diet have such a low incidence of heart disease. Olive oil has been used to treat indigestion, diaper rash, infertility, dry hair, chapped lips, and has even thought to cure depression. Further studies show that it can reduce the risk of cancer and Alzheimer's disease. Many Italians still drink a shot of olive oil every morning as part of their health regimen. Gary Beecham, the director of the Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia, figured out that the burning sensation at the back of the throat when one swallows good olive oil is similar to the burning one gets when one chews an ibuprofen. He was actually chewing ibuprofen for another test and realized that it was the same as the olive oil. And so after extended scientific experimentation, he figured out that it's actually the same molecule that causes the burn in both the olive oil and the ibuprofen. As it turns out, olive oil has the same anti-inflammatory properties as ibuprofen. As a natural anti-inflammatory, it helps with chronic pain, and it is the reason that it can reduce the risk of heart disease. Now, philosophical research on taste, if it's about food or drink, tends to be almost exclusively done about wine. Now, wine is the most potentially complex of the liquids that we ingest, but it's also something that we drink mostly in order to taste it or to accompany good food and for reasons having to do with social lubrication. Olive oil is common in much of our food and dressings without us even realizing it, though. Italians, especially Southern Italians, use it to cook meat, potatoes, they use it in baked goods, ice cream, and countless other foods. It enhances the flavors of many different foods, from salad to chocolate cake. And if you haven't had chocolate cake with olive oil on it, you actually need to try that. Olive oil was and still is one of the most important substances in much of the Mediterranean, as it is used for cooking, skin care, hair growth, heart ailments, diaper rash, religious purposes, trade, deodorant, and as a basis for perfumes and lamp oil. But olive oil also has some important complexities in it and variations as well. And like many foods, olive oil can have exceptional terroir, that is, aspects of geography, elevation, weather, soil conditions, and climate that impact the taste dramatically. The subtle variations in the oil can only be determined by taste. Now, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, olive oil has an extremely checkered past. The first record of olive oil fraud, where cheaper and lower quality oils were used to cut the pure olive oil, was over 2,000 years ago. This is the first instance of any sort of food fraud on record. In artifacts from ancient Greece and Rome, hundreds of thousands of olive oil amphorae show evidence of extensive measures taken to avoid fraud. Each amphora was painted with the exact weight of oil it contained, along with the name of the farm where the olives were pressed, the merchant who shipped the oil, and the official who verified the information before shipment. Mount Testaccio in Rome, a literal mountain of ancient olive oil containers, is a treasure trove of history that allows us important access to the ancient Roman olive oil industry. And each of the terracotta amphorae gives information about the contents of its oil. In ancient times, people bought on average 50 liters of oil a year and spent on it what we might spend on petroleum. It was an incredibly important commodity, and because of its value, it was also rife with the potential for fraud. Now, based on the amphora that we have, it's also clear that the government, sellers, and consumers anticipated the fraud and took extensive measures to stop it. But much of the world's supply of olive oil has been tampered with. There are three primary ways in which extra virgin olive oil can be altered. Lesser quality oils like canola, peanut, soybean, and so-called vegetable oil are added to pure olive oil to increase the volume without radically impacting the color or viscosity, but they usually lessen the peppery flavor and the health benefits. Second, the extra virgin oil can be diluted with other lower grades of olive oil. This makes an acidity test almost impossible to detect, since the acidity level will always stay the same. Third, producers can manufacture oil at the very low end of the regulatory spectrum using old olives, adding old oil from previous years that has been held in storage for long periods of time and has gone bad. Some estimates are that as much as 80% of the world production of olive oil is cut with cheaper oils, lessening the benefits of its consumption. Other estimates are that only 2% of the olive oil that's sold is really top-tier extra virgin olive oil. But olive oil is a substance that one cannot know the quality of without extensive knowledge of taste, at least of some premium oils. Chemical tests are unreliable since they only measure the chemical and acidity levels, 0.08% at most for extra virgin, and they rely less on the origin of the fruit or of the quality of the fruit. Chemical tests cannot yet determine taste. Recently, the Italian government has taken anti-fraud measures by requiring Italian producers to sell oil in glass bottles that are not refillable. They have a built-in device which only allows the oil to flow out one way. They cannot refill it with poor oil. By the end of the 20th century, according to one EU investigator, olive oil was considered the most adulterated agricultural product in the European Union, with potential profits comparable to the cocaine trafficking with, quote-unquote, none of the risks. But there are risks to bad oil, and the worst one is death. In 1981, in Spain, there was an outbreak of what has been called toxic oil syndrome, in which over 20,000 people died from ingesting fraudulent oil made from rapeseed oil, or what we call canola oil, that was denatured with aniline, a highly toxic organic compound used to manufacture plastic. This is the worst case in history, but since the fraud is so rampant, although you might not die from a cut-rate product, you will also not reap the many health benefits or flavor benefits of this almost magical substance. Now, what might be philosophically worse is that we develop false beliefs about what olive oil tastes like, and thus we make faulty judgments based on these false beliefs. Now, good olive oil should be peppery, bitter, fruity, and it should smell like fresh olives. It should be green. Olive oil is the only kind of oil that is made with the flesh of the olive rather than the pit or the stone from which most other plant-based oils are made. Now, olive oil is really a form of fruit juice, and it doesn't get better with age like wine or balsamic. Olive oil degrades over time and with sunlight, and so good olive oil is always sold in darkened glass. Olive oil is something whose benefits are greatest when it's fresh, and oil that is more than a year old is often not good, and the health benefits diminish and the taste suffers. So there are 16 official taste flaws as determined by the EU. Fusty, musty, muddy, vinegary, metallic, rancid, burnt, hay, rough, greasy, vegetable water, brine, grassy, earthy, grubby, and cucumber. Now, if any of these flaws are detected, the olive oil cannot be sold to high-end producers, and no chemical tests can detect these, only humans. Now, extra virgin olive oil is one of the first designations given by the European Parliament as a legal grade of oil. The law passed in 1960 required that extra virgin olive oil be made solely by mechanical methods without chemical treatment, and set a number of chemical requirements, including a maximum of 1% free acidity. The acid levels are one of the primary factors in assessing the quality from Levante, or lamp oil, which is not fit for human consumption. Now, the difference between extra virgin and Levante is only 1% of acidity. Now, further, it cannot have any taste flaws, and it must have some perceptible fruitiness. According to journalist Tom Mueller, with this law, olive oil became the first food in the world and to this day one of a mere handful, whose quality was legally determined in at least partly by its taste. But given that so much of the production is adulterated either by cheaper oils or by heat, many people would not know how to identify real oil given the opportunity. Many Americans, at least, have actually become accustomed to olive oil that's rancid, since most of what is sold there has already gone bad. And of course, most people don't drink it straight either. If it hasn't gone bad, olive oil that we buy in a grocery store is likely to be denatured or heated or treated with chemicals to lessen the natural peppery flavor. But we can't taste the difference because we don't know the difference. And if extra virgin oil can produce the health benefits that Italians and Greeks claim, then we're being taken advantage of, paying for medicine and receiving snake oil. So how do we stave off that fraud? Certainly, we can't all become expert olive oil tasters, except that we can. Opportunities abound if you know where to look for classes or olive oil bars and even olive presses. Intentional tasting can allow one to begin to learn what good olive oil tastes like. And as with visual art, this doesn't happen in a day, but regular exposure and intentional comparisons can easily lead to a more refined ability to taste and thus to know good oil. Our tongues can distinguish vast differences and also subtle distinctions between different foods and liquids, but philosophers at least have not always given the sense of taste full credit, since there may not be cognitive or content associated with that sense. Now, I might here be accused of elitism, as I recommend olive oil tasting classes, but it's just an example of one of the ways that we can begin to pay attention to taste, all taste. I don't need to argue that there's cognitive content, but rather that the kind of knowledge that taste can provide is something that can be cultivated, developed, learned, and eventually known. So why have we had such a mistrust in taste? Because it's subjective and it's bodily. And the historical context that we work within just doesn't allow it. We make better use of taste in its metaphorical use than the literal. But gustatory taste is often not something that we have intentionally cultivated reliable knowledge about. If we did, we might be able to tell the difference between real olive oil and fake because we had experience and then we had knowledge of it. We don't know the difference because we read a label or see the color, but because we know it with our tongues. Our tongue, and only our tongue, can compare flavors to other oils that we've tasted before and can put them in context with the taste that we also know. If we're able to break away from the epistemology of vision paradigm that we've inherited from our philosophical ancestors, we might be able to trust in taste in some ways that we have had just refused to before. This isn't something that we need to leave to the experts any more than we need to leave the appreciation of art to the historians. Cultivating and training can lead to better judgments, less fraud, more pleasure, understanding and articulation of preferences, and most importantly, more reliable taste knowledge. So this raises some important philosophical questions about taste, specifically about whether we start with assumptions that are realist or idealist. Is taste something in the mind? Does it exist in the external object? If it's something in the mind, then it would be virtually impossible to have objective knowledge about various foods, since it would all be literally completely subjective and dependent upon personal experience alone. If we approach our theory of taste as realist, then it would be seemingly impossible to gain access to that knowledge, since we have to ingest or destroy the food in order to know firsthand what it tastes like. This isn't the case with objects of vision, since the object of perception is not impacted by our perceiving of it. But because taste is inherently subjective, it seems that we cannot have objective knowledge of taste at all. But that doesn't seem right. There's all kinds of properties, aesthetic properties perhaps, that are inherent in objects of consideration, and people are regularly able to identify these properties with high level of agreement. And this is presumably what sommeliers do with great consistency. Now, we might go the route of talking about extrinsic and intrinsic qualities. Extrinsic qualities are described as the way something tastes in terms of being flowery, fresh, lemony, or cucumbery. The categorization of flavor as lemony, for example, is a mental connection between the taste of an oil and lemons, but there's no lemon in the oil. Intrinsic qualities are qualities that are inherent in the oil that we can only experience with our sense of taste. We can't perceive them by looking at them. Other kinds of beings can't experience them, and it's impossible to perceive them without tasting. Intrinsic qualities of oil would be about the mouthfeel of the oil, the level of spiciness, or in the case of good olive oil, pepperiness, how long the flavors stay in the back of one's throat. Good olive oil should not leave a residue in the mouth. So we have intrinsic and extrinsic qualities that we experience from tasting that we can only experience from tasting. The intrinsic qualities seem to be in the oil, and the extrinsic qualities seem to be in the mind. Now I won't push this distinction further, but I've got stronger claims coming. So let's take one more philosophical step backwards. The underlying question that needs to be addressed is whether we can derive knowledge from taste, and if so, what kind of knowledge that might be. It's obviously not propositional knowledge where we understand something to be the case through true justified belief. It also doesn't seem to be non-propositional knowledge or procedural knowledge where we know how to do something. It's not theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, or a priori knowledge. It seems to be a form of a posteriori knowledge, one based on experience. But that's too general. What we get from taste is, I suggest, a form of knowledge that is deeply aesthetic in nature, since it completely is derived from the senses, and also deeply dependent upon experience. So aesthetic knowledge, then, is the basis of our ability to understand the look, the feel, sound, and taste of various sensuous objects in the world. We perceive and experience through sense experience, and these experiences all have individual qualia, or experiences of what it is like. The sense of what it is like is called a feel. I smell my morning coffee, and it is my experience of the smell of that coffee. I feel rough sandpaper, and it is my experience of the sandpaper. Qualia are not the same as knowledge, though, and their connection to knowledge is extremely tenuous. Since we don't all have the exact same qualitative feels, we might not be able to have the same propositional knowledge. But we do all experience the world primarily through qualia, and from there we interpret concepts, metaphors, and the external world. So I believe that gustatory knowledge can be derived from taste. And this kind of knowledge is something that taste can provide in a way that maybe no other sense can. Significantly, taste, separated from touch and smell, is deeply theoretical. Taste, touch, and smell are intertwined so closely that it is important to remember that discussions of each one separately are only theoretical. Taste without smell is virtually impossible, and in order to taste, one always senses temperature and texture. Taste is also dependent upon the transactional relationship between the inner and the outer, the object and the subject, the external thing, and my ingestion of that thing. Our mouths and tongues function as vehicles not only as the receptacle for nutrition and pleasure, but also like a radar detector that can distinguish flavors, flavor combinations, textures, spiciness, and the most subtle distinctions of flavor. With no other sense do we literally consume and then transform the outer to make it part of ourselves. But we don't just ingest it, we taste it as we transform it. We chew, food mixes with our saliva, and what we swallow eventually gets absorbed into our bodies. We may pay more or less attention to tasting, but the potential is there in most of what we ingest. Before this gets too weird, I want to give some serious credit to taste as being, it's just a really unique capacity for us that I don't think that we really give credit to. And it's not something that we merely have so that we can differentiate bitter or poisonous foods from the sweet ones, but it's literally this gateway between us and the outside world. The mouth and the sense of taste acts as its own interpretive lens through which we don't only experience sweet, sour, bitter, salt, and umami, but we can taste our mother's cooking, we can experience other cultures through their distinctive flavors, and we can learn to differentiate flavors more carefully than we ever have before. Now, eating and tasting can provide a kind of experience that no other sense can. So, there's a philosophical paradox here that is, it's called the paradox of taste. And so this paradox rests in the divide between recognizing on the one hand that taste is subjective of the subject, And that, on the other hand, that there are compelling reasons to claim widespread agreement about flavors and distinctions. Now, David Hume started us down this path, but the groundwork he laid has been difficult for us to move away from. And that is that Hume claims that our sentiments or opinions can all be right, but there is only one right judgment. And sentiment is a preference, but judgment is based on reason. Sentiment is internal and personal, but judgment is external and objective. He says no sentiment represents what is really in the object. It only marks a certain conformity or relation between the object and organs or faculties of the mind, and if that conformity did not really exist, the sentiment could never possibly have being. Although Hume talks almost exclusively about literature in his essay, ironically, he does actually make one comment about gustatory taste, using it only as a metaphor about how absurd it would be to look for beauty or deformity in an object. He says this would be like looking for the real sweetness or the real bitterness. His famous example is taken from a part of Don Quixote where two men are charged with tasting wine from a large cask. Both men determine that the wine is good, but one says it has a hint of iron, and the other one says it has a hint of leather. As it turns out, both men are right as they discover a key with a leather thong at the bottom of the barrel. For Hume, it makes perfect sense that two tasters would experience different things, despite the fact that they drink the same wine. Hume's epistemology assumes that sentiments, sensations, and preferences are all subjective, and at the same time, he knows that given the right kind of experiences, education, training, and refined sense organs, one could ultimately become a true judge and to be able to be reliably ascertain beauty in any object that had beauty, despite the fact that beauty, he says, is only in the mind. So he ends up being an aesthetic realist about taste because he thinks that the aesthetic properties are in the aesthetic objects that we contemplate. This is ironic since he is actually such a skeptic about causal realism and is famous for arguing elsewhere that we can have no absolute certainty about matters of causation. So this paradox of taste forces us to decide where beauty is, where pleasure resides, and whether or not we can have universal agreement about whether or not something is beautiful. Is beauty in the object, in the subject? How can I be sure? Our entire vocabulary as knowledge is built around what we call objective knowledge, knowledge of something that is outside of us. We don't even have meaningful terms for knowledge of the bodily senses. But for me, the paradox of taste is not actually about beauty, but about taste, the literal taste, and how we can be sure of what we're tasting. These are questions that philosophers have struggled with since antiquity, but they really came to the fore in the 18th century. But the disappointing answer is that it just actually depends on whose metaphysics and whose epistemology you adopt. For Kant, in order to be able to make claims about pure aesthetic judgments, one must be able to contemplate an object disinterestedly, separate from any instrumental value that the thing might have. But food and drink have always had instrumental value since we need them to survive. For Hume, we can only come to an idealized theoretical standard of taste given a multitude of proficiencies that are virtually impossible to achieve. Discussions of this abstract view of beauty have flowed generously from these two philosophers in the ensuing 300 years, but the absolute abstraction of the notion of taste, I believe, has skewed the discussions of gustatory taste. Now, if the subject-object distinction were collapsed, the paradox of taste would collapse as well. But if we start with gustatory knowledge as actually being knowledge, there's no paradox at all, and we don't need to wonder where beauty lies. So perhaps then, we need a different model with which to think about taste. I mentioned Kant and Hume because they're so influential in the way that we've come to think about these issues. But I'm not sure that their epistemologies are not somewhat outdated in terms of what we now understand about experience and perception and taste. Now, there's quite a bit more recent conceptual work about perception, but still it almost always defaults into discussions of vision. And I'm going to try to make sense of it for taste. We gather all of the knowledge of the world initially through perception. We look at the floor, determine that it's flat, or we look out the window and determine that it's snowing. We taste a grape and determine that it is round and sweet. In order for these kinds of perceptions to become knowledge, they have to be true, and we have to have good reasons for believing them. This is one of the mainstays of most forms of epistemology. We know that our senses trick us on occasion. A spoon looks bent in half a glass of water, even though we know that it's not. But in general, our senses provide reliable input for us to navigate around the world, interact very precisely with different objects, and to smell and taste a huge variety of foods. Now, in general, we call this perceiving as, or in general parlance, actually seeing as. For my purposes, we'll call it tasting as. Our ability to perceive the world is not the same as having certainty that we perceive it correctly. This is the basis of Descartes' skepticism and desire to prove that we could perceive with certainty. He wanted to demonstrate the link between our perceptions of the world and irrefutable knowledge that we are perceiving the world correctly. We still desire this kind of certainty of perception, even though we don't need to take on the radical skepticism that Descartes did. But taste, just like vision, doesn't always perceive everything, and what it does perceive is largely dictated by experience and attention. I want to be careful here not to mistake the kind of taste I'm talking about with taste as preference, right? So gustatory, literal tasting with this, I like things. Gustatory taste dictates a huge amount of the experiences that we have interacting with the world around us, so I want to give it sufficient credit for the work that it really does. So my original claims here were about olive oil and fraud. Now there's lots of reasons that one might think it important to be able to differentiate good oil from bad, or pure oil from oil cut with cheaper substitutes. Health reasons, of course, and reasons that have to do with wanting to know that you're getting what you're paying for. For me, the reason is that I want to suggest that one can have a greater appreciation for good olive oil because there's literally more to experience. If we have false beliefs about what olive oil is supposed to be like, then we miss out on an experience of oil that's authentic. We become gullible and thus much more likely to be subjects of fraud. If we do not learn to taste, then it doesn't matter what we buy or what we eat, since we will not know the difference. Without the knowledge gained from refined ability to taste, we're more susceptible to false beliefs about all kinds of foods, drinks, and tastes. If we become easily fooled, then we miss out on something important, just like we do with art when we buy a fake, thinking that we're buying an original. So what's the account that might resolve the paradox of taste and give meaning to gustatory knowledge then? So first is the recognition that taste is fundamentally different from vision, and that epistemologically we cannot have the same kind of object-subject distinction. Taste is unmediated by distance, but this doesn't mean that it cannot have a reflective or cognitive component. We also need to reject the notion that tastes cannot be educated. Exposure and reflection can help to develop a more refined palate, not just for high-end food, but for a range of tasting qualities that are not readily available to everyone. Hume might call this a delicacy of taste, this ability to make fine distinctions, but he wasn't referring to gustatory taste in his general theory. Tasting, the activity of tasting, is one that admits of change as one goes, as one is exposed to new and different kinds of foods, drinks, and cuisines, as one develops a clear sense of what one likes and what one doesn't like, and as we begin to learn to make careful distinctions about quality and taste. So if I reject or put aside the vision-centered propositional knowledge as being my primary goal, and I accept that it's possible to learn to make fine distinctions tasting food and drink, then it's possible to open the gates for another kind of knowledge, gustatory knowledge. With gustatory knowledge, we can discriminate between good and bad, rotten and sweet, lemons and batteries, and low quality and high quality. People with gustatory knowledge can differentiate between fusty oil and musty oil, and they can experience the peppery burn of good olive oil as something positive. But having gustatory knowledge is really akin to being able to differentiate colors or sounds. As a musician, I have been trained to identify various intervals, and so I have a kind of knowledge that people with untrained ears do not have. This isn't just about learning, hearing or identifying intervals, but about hearing counterpoint, parallel fifths, chord progressions, and resolutions. We can call this auditory knowledge. This kind of knowledge isn't instinctual, but it must be learned, and it's available to everyone who learns to pay attention in certain ways. But these kinds of knowledge, auditory and gustatory, and visual and tactile and olfactory for that matter, doesn't include the aesthetic aspect just yet. This is where pleasure needs to be reintroduced. The ability to find pleasure in correct distinctions, resolutions, combinations, and expressions of food, drink, music, and art more generally is the way that we gain access to aesthetic knowledge. So while philosophers have debated for centuries about where beauty lies in the mind or in an object, this might miss the point of real aesthetic experience, which is finding pleasure in the sensory impressions of the world around us. So ironically, if the theory starts from gustatory taste, aesthetic knowledge seems intuitive and simple, whereas if we start with a vision-based epistemology, it seems counterintuitive and rife for rejection, since the dependence on distance, physical and psychological, is built directly into the account. Accounts that build in a subject-object detachment leave no room for the bodily senses and the satisfaction that we can get with bodily experience. Taste is tricky, since its philosophical history is so intertwined with taste as a physiological sense and taste as a metaphor for finding the right kinds of pleasures in various kinds of experiences. If we reject the vision-centered epistemology and give gustatory taste a fair playing field, we do not only have intellectual and bodily pleasure, but rather a wide range of sensations that are detectable by the mouth that range from spicy to sweet, from fresh to vinegar, and from grubby to grassy. And we know what is good, we know what we like, we know what is familiar, what the flavors of different regions are, and we know that the ability to make those distinctions always allows us to learn about the world in fundamental and delightful ways. Thank you.
Now, Gustavo, if this is replying.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed you reading your paper. Sarah's thought-provoking paper argues for at least these three theses. One, she wants to break away from the epistemology of vision and argue for a more inclusive epistemology that includes touch, smell, and taste, with particular emphasis on this last one. Let's call it a multi-sensory epistemology. Two, she opposes the view that holds that taste provides sensation, but not cognitive content. She argues that taste is an important vehicle for knowledge. She then tries to answer the question about what kind of knowledge this might be. Three, she argues that we can distinguish and properly know the difference between authentic and fraudulent food ingredients based on the case of olive oil. So I shall say a few things about this thesis. Sarah is right in that epistemology has been mainly focused on vision and to a lesser extent on hearing, and that it has neglected touch, smell, and taste, giving them the status of lower senses. Sarah cites a number of philosophers who have helped to install this sense hierarchy where vision is on the top. These philosophers have argued that the knowledge we get from touch, smell, and taste seems to be more subjective than the one we get from visual and hearing experiences, more conducive to objectivity than the other senses. Therefore, this knowledge seems to be less reliable. I think that in addition to these reasons, to the reasons Sarah cites, there are some other reasons for this hierarchical understanding of the senses, evolutionary reasons. We are primates, and primates tend to rely much more on visual perception than other species for their survival. In fact, the area in the brain devoted to vision, the visual cortex, takes up about 30% of the cortex, as compared with 8% for touch and 3% for hearing. And I couldn't even get that data for smell and taste. Approximately 70% of learning in humans tend to be based on vision. On the other hand, compared to other species, some of our lower senses are underdeveloped. Dogs possess up to 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 6 million in us. And the part of a dog's brain that is devoted to analyzing the smells is, proportionately speaking, 40 times greater than ours. Dogs rely much more on smell than we do, but we rely much more on vision. Dogs don't see as well as humans, for instance. They have less sensitivity of brightness and variations in shades of gray, and they also see less colors. We rely much more on vision and hearing experiences for our survival. We see and hear different kinds of situations that may present a risk to our lives. We do not go around tasting things in order to know whether they're good for us. It would be dangerous. In general, it's only food we taste, and we tend to smell it before we eat it. So no wonder why epistemology has given more emphasis to vision and hearing over olfactory or gustatory experiences. However, this does not justify the quasi-exclusivity of vision and hearing when it comes to discussions about knowledge. I agree with Sarah. Epistemology should pay more attention to the so-called lower senses. It seems to me that this is going to be hard, though. Now, does taste give us any knowledge? Philosophers in the past thought that taste was unable to give us knowledge, but only mere sensations. Taste didn't have any cognitive content, they said. This, it seems to me, was part of an empiricist tradition in which these sense experiences were conceived as inner episodes, sensations, that occur to agents without any prior concepts, knowledge, beliefs, or process of learning. It is weird that non-empiricists such as Kant and Hegel share this position of viewing the case of taste, this point of view in the case of taste. However, this naive empiricism, let's call it, has long been criticized. The idea that in perception we get sense data with no cognitive content at all, to which we are basically passive, and to which later on we apply a conceptual scheme, was criticized and rejected by people like Austin, Wittgenstein, Sellars, and Davidson, among others. So I don't see any reason to apply the same ideas to taste, since it is also a perceptual experience. Taste doesn't give us mere sensations with no cognitive content. Gustatory experiences involve concepts that the agent actualizes every time she tastes something. If I am right, then I don't see why the knowledge we get from taste may not be propositional. Sarah says that the knowledge we derive from taste, quote, obviously is not propositional knowledge, for we understand something to be the case through true justified belief, end of quote. Propositional knowledge is the one that is expressed in declarative sentences or indicative propositions. Even if I cannot tell you what olive oil tastes like, I can always describe certain flavors as olive oily, assuming that you're already acquainted with olive oil. In fact, we have lots of words for describing flavors: bitter, spicy, unpleasant, acid, caustic, vitriolic, sour, etc. And we can describe new flavors using these concepts. One of the things we get from sensory knowledge is knowledge of the qualitative content of our experiences, or qualia. Sarah tells us that, quote, qualia are not the same as knowledge, and of course, their connection to knowledge is extremely tenuous, end of quote. Sure, qualia are not the same as knowledge, but I don't think that their connection with perceptual knowledge is tenuous. Qualia are precisely what the empiricist tradition emphasizes in taste, sensations. But a good part of the discussion about qualia is whether they're irreducible to intentional states. Some philosophers think qualia can be reduced to intentional states, and if this is so, they may not be that subjective. Actually, part of the discussion about qualia has been on whether they're a completely subjective phenomenon. Thomas Nagel, for instance, thinks that there cannot be an objective account of qualia. Depending on how we answer these questions, the place qualia are going to have in our theory of sensory knowledge is going to vary. However, I do not think that the connection between qualia and knowledge is tenuous. I actually think it is essential to this kind of sensory knowledge. It is what gives it its subjective nature, which it undeniably has, and that is why we don't all have the same qualitative content when we taste olive oil. Knowledge doesn't have to be objective in order to be knowledge. Subjective knowledge, such as the knowledge I have of my own mind and qualitative states, is also knowledge, and to a large degree it is translatable into propositional knowledge. Even if sometimes words may not be enough, I can always try to describe to you what it is like to taste extra virgin olive oil, or the smell of, or smell the scent of freshly ground coffee. I don't mean to say that this knowledge is completely subjective, and that's why I also don't think there are bases to justify the paradox of taste. That is, recognizing on the one hand that taste is subjective, and on the other, that there are compelling reasons to claim widespread agreement about flavors and distinctions. There is widespread agreement about flavors for several reasons. First of all, I think we can once again cite evolutionary reasons. We evolved to appreciate a wide variety of tastes due to our omnivorous evolutionary history, usually flavors associated with the kinds of foods we most need, such as calorie-dense foods. Secondly, we can also cite cultural reasons. For instance, if you grow up in Mexico, you're going to develop a taste for spicy food, and your tolerance to spicy food is going to be much higher than it would be if you were born in, say, Switzerland. Of course, there is room for some subjectivity, and there may be completely personal factors that make you dislike spicy food. In short, gustatory knowledge is not completely subjective, neither completely culturally relative. We do know some of the objective properties of food, and we evolve to appreciate them. Now, Sarah argues that we can distinguish and properly know the difference between authentic and fraudulent food ingredients based on the case of olive oil. I think she could have as well used the example of honey, since it is also one of the most adulterated foods in the world. I take this as meaning that we can, through the sense of taste, know the difference. From the very beginning of her paper, Sarah traces a parallelism between fraudulent food and deceptive art. Now, how similar is the case of food fraud to that of art forgeries? The problem of fraudulent art is why there is any aesthetic difference between a deceptive forgery and an original work of art. Why is it that two apparently identical objects differ in their aesthetic value? There have been three traditional answers to the problem. One, the formalist, which claims that there are no aesthetic differences between an original work of art and a deceptive forgery. Only the visual features of, say, the painted surface are relevant for its appreciation, and only properties that are internal to the object count. External properties, such as who painted it or where it was painted, do not. However, this answer does not account for generally accepted aesthetic values such as originality and authenticity. Two, the historicist answer, which maintains that the aesthetic differences come from different histories of the two objects. And three, the reductionist, which claims that the difference can be traced to the physical differences between the two objects. Can we use this classification to think about food fraud? And if so, where can we place Sarah's answer? I think it doesn't make any sense to try to apply a formalist theory to the case of food fraud, at least in the case of olive oil. What would the formal properties be? The surface properties, for instance, the flavor. I also don't think that the historicist answer accounts for the difference. It would be rather snobbish to claim that some olive oil is aesthetically better only because it has a certain origin or only because it comes from a certain factory, particularly when the two oils seem to be identical. For the connoisseur, these reasons are just going to have a secondary role in the evaluation of an olive oil. So we're left with the reductionist account, since fake and authentic olive oil may differ in their physical differences. Nelson Goodman defended this kind of approach when he said, quote, "Although I cannot tell the pictures apart by merely looking at them now, the fact that the left-hand one is the original and the right-hand one a forgery constitutes an aesthetic difference for me now because knowledge of this fact, one, stands as evidence that there may be a difference between them for me now that I can learn to perceive. 2. Assigns the present looking a role as training toward such a perceptual discrimination. And 3. Makes consequent demands that modify and differentiate my present experience in looking at the two pictures. End of quote. Somehow, I'm just about to end. Somehow I think this fits with Sarah's account. I can learn to appreciate the differences between fake and authentic olive oils. Knowing the difference assigns the present tasting a role as training toward such a perceptual discrimination, and makes consequent demands that modify my present experience in tasting the two olive oils. However, Sarah insists that gustatory knowledge by itself does not include the aesthetic aspect just yet. This is where pleasure needs to be reintroduced. End of quote. So learning to differentiate authentic from fake does not necessarily add aesthetic value to an authentic olive oil. This only happens when it pleases you. But this pleasure has to be the result of that knowledge for it to account for the greater aesthetic value of an authentic extra virgin olive oil. First cold press, of course.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I'm a little puzzled. I'm a little puzzled, Sarah, by. I mean, I agree with you that the lower senses should not be the lower senses. So, but I'm not sure, once you've recognized that, why you don't just promote them to being higher senses, or the same status as the higher senses. Why do you persist in giving them, making a distinction between them, particularly a distinction in terms of the propositional knowledge that they provide? So, to give you an example, you said that you could divide authentic olive oil from fake or rancid olive oil by the flavor of the. So there's a different flavor being attributed by the gustatory sense to the genuine olive oil, and a different flavor to the fake. So why does that not amount to, if you wanted to put that into words, obviously the senses don't put it into words, but if you were going to put it into words, why wouldn't that be, this oil has the taste of genuine olive oil or authentic extra virgin olive oil, and this oil does not?
So I think you just asked like 5 questions in there.
I only meant to ask one. Yeah. Why don't you make it propositional?
All right, I have 5 answers. So I think that in response to what you said initially, actually, is so evolutionarily, vision is much more important, right? And I don't want to dismiss that, right? And of course, vision is very, very important. In thinking about these questions, I was astonished at the number of examples that had come up over and over and over again about perception, about knowledge, about all of these things, where the only examples provided were about vision. And I don't think that that's wrong. I just think that it's ironic that in the field of aesthetics, especially, that so I mean I do think that vision and hearing are more important than taste, touch, and smell. But in aesthetics, I feel like they should be taken more seriously. But not necessarily in epistemology more generally. I think that all of our senses, and I think this is one of the things that I tried to get across in the paper, is that all of our senses do radically different things for us. But when we only default to vision, as an example, we sort of forget that our senses do very, very different things. I think it's also, I mean, one of the things that I've researched in a longer version of this paper is historically, 5 senses is not universal. And some say 4, some say 6, some say 12. And so I think sort of limiting ourselves to the way that we think about the 5 that we've decided on right, allow us to just dig our heels in further about these are our five senses and this is what we get. But I really believe the more that I've thought about this, and again, I think that the olive oil is just a really great jumping off point for thinking about these issues is if you haven't learned to differentiate taste, you taste a good oil and a bad oil and taste the same thing, right? And for somebody who has learned to differentiate, they have two different experiences than you do. And I think with vision, it's a lot harder to see that as an example of, right? I mean, if you look at the chair and I look at the chair and you say it's blue and I say it's orange, we have something to talk about and we can sort of correct each other. And with taste, if I say, oh, this oil is bad, and you go, seems fine to me, we're having a conversation that is much less easily resolved. Does that answer your question or not?
It's an answer.
Maybe, yeah.
Alama?
So this is really tangential to your talk, but I was just curious. I mean, you talked about fraud in terms of fake taste or like changing the concentration of olives or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering whether you also, for example, the origin of the olive oil, would you consider that as well fraud? I mean, a possible fraudulent way to fake food as well? I mean, and I mentioned this because in the case of the of olive oil, there was this big dispute, and I think that Alessandro and you might jump against Sebas and I, where a lot of olive oil that was sold as Italian olive oil was actually Spanish olive oil. Right. And that was like, of course, in Spain, there was So, right, right. So I don't know if that's fraud. I mean, not a.
I mean, that's something that causes a lot of false beliefs, right? Because olive oil is made all over the world, as it turns out. And we were talking about at lunch, a lot of it comes from Australia, a lot of it comes from Argentina, a lot of it comes from Spain. But if it's what happens is that it's all brought to Italy and then sold as by an Italian company and sold as Italian oil, and everybody thinks that Italian oil is the best. And it's completely meaningless. It's completely meaningless, and I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, having grown up in Italy. Well, but it's for Italians. I mean, the southern oil is completely different than northern oil, and everybody, no matter where you go, will say that their oil is the best. So there's a big variety. But I think that there's this. I think we do have a false belief about oil, especially just needing to be from Italy, right? If it's from Italy, then it's good, which is just false. And I've started reading olive oil containers like I never have before, and they actually go to great lengths to hide the origin, right? So they come up with, there'll be like a little asterisk that says, this oil was grown in, and it'll have a 2-letter abbreviation that doesn't look at all like the abbreviation for the country, right? And it'll say in even finer print on the back, the 2-letter abbreviation is actually Argentina or whatever, but you have to really look for it. But it'll say Pompeii, olive oil, made in Italy.
From ashes.
Right. Yeah. So it is. I mean, it's a different kind of fraud, but it's something that very much causes us to have false beliefs about the oil, given origin, mistaken origin. You should read your bottles very closely, actually.
I do.
You should go home and read those bottles. And if they're in clear glass or plastic, you should throw it away. Absolutely. It's terrible.
So, and also, the example that you pick is olive oil, and you mentioned that you should recognize certain features, that those features are not characteristic of every extra olive oil, and there is going to be a variety depending on the olive variety. So it seems to correspond to something like a picual, where you have the pepperishness and the bitterness, but if you go to Arbicua, for example, it will be much sweeterness
Sweeter, yeah.
and fruity. So it's not clear that first you have to taste it. It's it's delicious if you like it, but it's gonna be a huge variety. So
Right.
just by tasting,
Right.
I give somebody to taste a picual, and then I give an arbequina and say like, oh, this is fraud. It's like I teach someone to recognize the green pepper smell in Cabernet or the body, and then I give a Pinot and say, oh, that's a bad wine. So
Yeah. So it's one of the reasons that I actually talk about tasting classes. But part of tasting classes are recognizing that there is a huge variety. I mean, just like with wine, right? It's not like there's good wine and bad wine. There's 1,000 different variations of it, right? And some people like dry, and some people like sweet, and right. But there's expectations, right? And there's a range of experience. But if you think that olive oil is just the giant bottle that you bought at the grocery store, if that's all there is, then you have false beliefs about the range of possibilities. I mean, there's like 7,000 different varieties of olives, something like that. Of course, there's a range. I mean, it's as complex and as various as wine.
So one of your propositions was that we can equate the epistemology of vision to the epistemology of taste. But since our language is heavily based on visual codes, can we properly communicate the knowledge we obtain about taste, and if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. But I think, so I was thinking about this earlier, actually. So, Wittgenstein talks about the private language argument, right? And so we can't really have private languages because there are grammars and rules, and there's rule following, and there's a vocabulary, right? And I feel like that's really missing in taste, right? Maybe the grammar and the rules. And one of the things that I think that we're not as good at is the vocabulary, right? But the vocabulary is the thing that gets us out of subjective private experience, right? So there's a whole range of other sort of interesting issues, like so there's a gene that about 10% of the population has, that if they have this gene, cilantro tastes like soap, right? You guys have heard of this, right? And so if you taste soap and I taste cilantro, you say yuck and I say yum, and then we're just sort of stuck, right? If we don't have that, if we can communicate more, if we can communicate better, with more precise language, right, we can make this experience less subjective. But I feel like sort of the vocabulary is the thing that allows us to communicate more efficiently about that.
Yeah, I'll grab the mic because Aaron, who's down there, has a question. I can do it, don't worry.
Thanks. I'd like to sing a little snow. So the first thing I'd like to say is you've forgotten Cretan olive oil, which is clearly the best olive oil.
Right.
First of all.
Yeah.
God.
Second, I just want to follow up.
I heard that they said that. Yeah. In Crete, right? Yeah. Absolutely.
The second thing, I want to follow up on what I took Mohan's question to be, something that was puzzling me. I didn't understand the dismissal of propositional knowledge from taste. I know that it tastes bitter. I know that it tastes different than that. There are all sorts of bits of knowledge I get from taste. It seems obvious that we get tons of propositional knowledge from taste. So I think the stuff about basically knowledge how that you pointed to is quite interesting, but I'm with Mohan, why ignore all the propositional knowledge we get from taste?
Right. So that one actually kind of refers back to your article, right? About second and testimony, right? Because what you're saying in the article is that there is propositional knowledge and it's transferable to person. If I have this, you know, if I have an idea of what orange juice tastes like, I can describe it to you and then you know, right? But I feel like with the example that I'm talking about, with the olive oil, it's so varied in reality, right? It's the experience that isn't about the propositional knowledge. I mean, maybe I'm just completely misguided about this, but I feel like it's the standardized food or processed food that tastes the exact same all the time. I think it's easier to have propositional knowledge about, right? Or you know, sort of the generic as opposed to the specific. But I really want to focus on the specific tastes. And I think that doesn't lend itself as well to the propositional.
I do want to sing, but should I pass it off to
to Martin.
Just a little song first.
This microphone does it, doesn't it?
So this is along the same lines, and I was just thinking of examples of propositional knowledge that we get from taste that are very straightforward. So if you give me 2 cups with an unknown liquid, and I taste them, I can tell that one of them is coffee and the other one is water, for example. And this is propositional knowledge, very straightforwardly. It is propositional knowledge that I got from my sense of taste. I got it via the flavor and what have you. So there is propositional knowledge that we get from taste. Now, you made, I think, another claim about there being some special quality or like some special kind of knowledge that we get from taste that we cannot get from other senses, like knowledge of flavor, for example. And I think this is true, but I wonder to what extent taste is special. So it seems to me that the sense in which there is some special kind of knowledge that we get from taste is the same in which there's some special kind of knowledge that we get from hearing that we don't get from touching or something like that. So I was just wondering if there's some further claim about the specialness of taste that you wanted to make.
No, I don't think so. But again, I think it's just the default nature to vision that has skewed the way that we think about knowledge. And again, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So this is water, and I can know that from tasting it, right, is an easy propositional knowledge, but the fine distinctions between 2 oils or 2 wines or 2 coffees might not be as propositional, right? There are also, I found out, sommeliers of water, and cheese and sake, but there are ranges of expertise in a number of these different foods. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'll back off on the propositional knowledge, but I do think that, I guess, sort of given our history, right? And I understand philosophy to be a discipline that is inherently tied to its philosophical roots. Given that tradition, we haven't given taste enough credit.
Ophelia?
Thanks. I'm not sure now, after the discussion, how committed you are to the sort of hierarchy between the senses, and now you've given up. There's this idea that Mohan and Aaron pressured you on that taste can be propositional. And that was the sort of way in which you would maintain the higher senses, lower senses, propositional, non-propositional. Now, if you, so maybe I want to offer another way in which I think the distinction can be maintained, and you seem to have gone toward this direction. And it resonates also with what Gustave was saying about vision, which is that there seems to be still an asymmetrical dependence between the senses, that in the sense that our identification in the case of vision doesn't depend on smell and taste. We can identify things. When you look at how our sense of smell and taste work, our performance in terms of being able to identify things is heavily dependent on us having seen the sources of this object. I mean, there's all this literature on how poorly we perform in blind tasting for wine and so on and so forth. So there's still a way in which these senses seem to be, not in terms of competence, because they might give us propositional knowledge, but the way we manage to achieve a certain level of accuracy and performance is heavily dependent on other senses. And yeah, exactly. So you could still maintain against people who want the pure equality. I'm not sure whether Mohan wants the pure equality of the senses, but I think there is this a sense in which vision has this form of superiority, that it doesn't depend on taste, whereas taste depend on vision much more.
Yeah, it's absolutely more reliable, and I don't question that. I just think that the taste is educable, right? It's something that we can educate that I don't think that we educate well. That I think that we undervalue, but I don't know why, right? And again, I mean, I think, food is expressive of culture, right? It's expressive of place. It's expressive of family and generosity. It's expressive of terroir. And so often we eat unthinkingly, right? We eat processed foods. We eat, there's a real mismatch, right, between what's possible and what we actually do. And I feel like if we educated our tastes more, that we might be able to make these small discriminations, but we also might be able to appreciate other cultures more fully, right? Again, like I said at the beginning, I take students to Italy every year, really to eat. We eat and we hike. But we live on an organic farm for a couple of weeks and cook and figure out where food comes from. And all the students say, "Oh, this is so much better. Why is the food better over here? Why does everything taste so good? And how come it isn't like that in the States?" But they're slowing down and they're paying attention in ways that they don't regularly pay attention to. And of course there's a myriad of reasons why, right? But given that food is the only thing that food can do, right? That taste gives us. I take students to Italy. They can't learn Italian, but they can eat and they can experience the culture in that way very, very quickly. And it's something that I really think that we undervalue in ways that I don't understand why. And again, in aesthetics especially, right? Is that aesthetics is just obsessed with vision.
Thanks. Sorry, just another point on the propositionality. So I was thinking actually that your account would actually require that you get propositional knowledge right from the bottom, and I mean a simple criterion for propositionality is just predicativity of the experience, as Aaron said. And well, if you don't get this predicative element right at the beginning, how would you get it to have the judgment that this oil is fraudulent? Or if you don't have it right at the beginning, then the only thing you would have is an inference. This property is being displayed, hence it should be the case that the oil is fraudulent. But this is not tasting that the oil is fraudulent. It's inferring from. So if you want to have the strong claim that you can really taste the genuine character or the fraudulent character, you should anchor right in the beginning in the structure of the experience the predicative nature of the taste, and then go higher up in the sensory properties. Otherwise, I don't see how you could actually make it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So we have another 2 questions. I hope you can keep it quick, because you have 5 minutes or less.
I'm not a student of philosophy, so this is more of a historical question. But one element of food that I feel like hasn't come up that much is the erotic component of it. That gustatory knowledge is carnal knowledge. It's the closest thing to sex that's not sex. So I guess historically I'm wondering is... So I was going to ask if there's an extent to which the dismissal of taste in that hierarchy of senses just comes down to prudishness.
Absolutely. And I would say even more so, it's associated with the body at all, and the body is associated with women, and bodies are untrustworthy and variable and inherently problematic. Absolutely.
And kitchens being spaces that belong to women. And
Yeah,
all that stuff as
yeah,
well.
that's a different chapter, actually. Yeah, it's a whole different chapter.
I actually wanted to say two things quickly. One has to do with taste and self-knowledge that I think you might be able to use to resist the, yes, it boils down to propositional knowledge. If you want to know what is it like to live your life or my life, or what would it be like to know what a person's life, I think that whole history of taste experience would be crucial and interesting. But then the other thing has to do with, you're talking about the way taste brings pleasure and knowledge together. And I think that could be like that's a hard thing for epistemology to deal with. And if you really do think that the pleasure and the knowing, the olive oil, are kind of inextricable, or you're trying to educate the pleasure and the knowledge, that it's this and it's not that, and it should taste like this. That's an interesting, we just don't think of knowledge that way. Anyway, so.
That's what Aristotle talked about, right? I'm not going to get this completely accurate, but sort of, you know that you're doing right when you take pleasure in making the right decisions, right? It's not just doing right, it's taking pleasure in making those choices. And it's not complete until you get the pleasure. I think that's right.
Okay, so we actually ran out of time, so let's thank the speaker.